Hey guys, it's Denden, and today we're going to be going over the quotes that tell us exactly what the Sea Devil is, and its connection to Emu and the Ancient Kingdom. We saw a girl offered up as a summoning to four gods in the sky in Skypiea in chapter 287, and the elder is shown to be called Pantori. We see a girl offered as a sacrifice to the devil summoned on Earth in Namakura Island in chapter 524, and the elder is called Pukori. So Oda is showing us with this parallel that the gods are in heaven above, which is in the clouds, and that the devil is down below, as in the sea, shown in the Namakura cover page by the summoning building being on the lowest floor and all the other buildings around it being raised, for example on flood stilts or on the top of a hill. In this scene, the gods are offered blood, evoking Joy Boy, Roger, and characters like Pedro's sacrifice. The devil, however, is offered an immortal soul, evoking Emu's immortality, and could be a clue as to why Emu wants Vivi. The priests on Namakura say, "Are you returning to hell, Demon Lord?" telling the reader that the devil is from hell in the One Piece world. The summoning circles used by Emu are tied to the abyss, and a summoning circle was used by the priest to summon Brook, so this tells us that the abyss is used to summon the devil from hell. The priest adds, "Now our dream will finally come true. We will have our revenge at last." So we can see that they are summoning the devil so they can make their dream a reality. They also say, "Lord Demon, if you grant our wish, you can have our immortal souls," telling us what they're offering in exchange for their dreams to be made true. They also offer a young girl as a sacrifice, just like in Skypiea, suggesting Emu wanted Lily as a sacrifice for the devil. When we look at the right side of the mural in Elbaf, we see Wano, a country deeply connected to the underworld. We also see people seemingly being taken underground and coming back up, holding some sort of energy. This energy is then taken up to Emu, who is attacking the Eve Tree, using Uranus and Zunisha. This energy is seen in one other place on the mural, which is above the head of the devil holding the sun. From this we can conclude that Emu is using the souls of people to summon the devil, and while everyone was busy fighting it, Emu moved on the Eve Tree, eventually leading to the construction of Marijua. But how would Emu know how to do something like this? It was because the Ancient Kingdom peaked trying to achieve the exact same thing. The authoring that time, however, was Emu's immortal soul. In an SBS in chapter 854, someone asks, "What is a heart full of belief?" Oda answers, "It could be, for example, the strength of mind to not be led astray by the deceptive lies of adults who cannot admit their own mistakes," telling us the Ancient Kingdom's downfall was caused by the deception and mistakes of those in charge. This means that in order to avoid the mistakes the Ancient Kingdom made, a person must be true to themselves and admit their mistakes. If people aren't true to themselves, it perpetuates a curse, told to the reader when Neptune says, "Traditions that overstay their welcomes become curses." The idea of being cursed, and thus overstaying your welcome, is touched on throughout the story, for example with Van der Decken, who travelled under the ocean but then was cursed to live forever, aka overstaying his welcome, and also the Gorosei, who seemingly are cursed by Emu and are immortal. The curse that the Ancient Kingdom bestowed upon the rest of the world is hinted to be Emu. Roger says a child is not responsible for the sins of the parents, suggesting Emu carries the burden of the Ancient Kingdom. There's evidence from Judge that Emu was sacrificed in some form in the quote, "Are you my sacrifice, Sanji?" In chapter 1099, Kuma says, "I would make a deal with you to save Bonnie's life, even if you were the devil," reinforcing this idea. A child says to Bonnie in 1097 that she's a vampire because she can't come into the light, potentially telling us that Emu cannot go into sunlight or leave Marijua because of whatever the Ancient Kingdom did. Perhaps the same way Zebek could be evoking Davy, and the way Roger evokes Joy Boy, the Ancient Kingdom was trying to use Emu as a conduit to evoke the devil. This would explain why Emu says Moo in third person, because Emu's body is possessed by another entity. Caesar tells us the specific cost of this deal is a heart, saying, "Give your heart to me, then our deal will be sealed." In chapter 858, Caesar says to Luffy, "My only escape from certain death was this guy taking control of my heart and making me his slave," implying Emu is possessed by the devil. In Heroic's speech, he suggests losing your heart doesn't kill a person, saying, "When does someone die? When their heart stops? No." We've seen people survive stuff like this before, for example in Punk Hazard, when the Straw Hats have their hearts switched. Additionally, this causes their personalities to switch along with it, adding to the idea Emu is possessed by a sea devil through his heart. It's hinted that the pain inside the devil's heart makes Emu the way he is. Jinbei says in chapter 624, "We are not asking you to forget your pain, but to not let that pain chain your heart." Kuma says in 1097 that if pain is left untouched, it goes back to the original person, meaning Emu's pain must be removed, which we can infer to mean Emu's heart needs to be removed. In 1099, King Bakuri returns to Sorbet 16 years after the revolutionary army have liberated it, and he says a wise king must steel his heart and enact cruel reforms. Emu reformed the world with the world government, so the parallel tells us Emu's heart is now steel. This is manifested in the narrative by the world government's relentless pursuit of advanced technology. Also, this could mean Zoro plays an important part in Emu's downfall, as his dream explicitly includes being skilled enough to cut steel. Furthermore, Bakuri is also said to have a heart of stone, which is how he can commit such awful acts on his own people, as opposed to Cobra, Kuma, Dalton and Kiros, who are all shown to love their people. This tells us Emu also has a stone heart, evoking Boa's ability to turn enemies into stone. This could imply that Emu's heart needs to be unpetrified, or in other words, needs to relinquish his immortality. Whitebeard alludes to this when he says, "I am only one man with one heart. Call me a demon, call me a monster, but I can't be the strongest forever." This could be why Blackbeard wanted Boa's fruit, considering his ties to Zebek, someone who approached Emu. As a quick aside, the statue in Jaya that people speculate looks like Emu is a stone statue, perhaps as a hint towards all this. In Jinbei's cover story, we see an offering left for a sea god. In the title, it's described as a mountain of food, and if you've watched my videos before, you'll know mountains always symbolize Emu. Think Higuma and the Mountain Bandit versus Shanks the Joy Boy character, or Odin the Joy Boy character against the mountain boar god in Wano. The offering is picked up by Wadatsumi, connecting Wadatsumi with the sea god. Wadatsumi is called Umi Bozu by Usopp, which many speculate to be Emu's yokai form. The Umi suffix in Wadatsumi and Umi prefix in Umi Bozu both reflect Emu's name backwards. What's happening here is Oda is symbolizing the devil by using Wadatsumi. In return for the offering, Wadatsumi takes a kingdom from the ocean and throws it on the land for the people. This tells us that someone made an offering with the sea devil and that in return they were given a kingdom, albeit at the cost of the animal kingdom. We know it's the animal kingdom because the inhabitants of the kingdom that Wadatsumi threw were all big sea beasts, which are just like giant animals mixed with sea creatures. This means that the ancient kingdom sacrificed nature for the boons of technology, and it could also mean that the monkey kingdom, aka the ancient kingdom, was taken by the dragon kingdom, aka the 20 Kings Alliance. At the end of the cover story, the animal kingdom is returned. An alliance between the sea beasts and humans are made, foreshadowing the end of what's going to be happening at One Piece. The western side of the world and the eastern side of the world will unite, etc, etc. Together, chapter 606 and 610 tell the reader about Van der Decken, the captain of a pirate crew from centuries ago that sailed on the Flying Dutchman. According to legend, during a stormy night, Decken suddenly went mad and began killing off his crewmates by throwing them overboard. He then invoked the wrath of God by defying him, and as a punishment, he and his ship were cursed to wander the seas forever. So here we are seeing references to storms, sea devils, curses and immortality, much like the stuff we've been talking about with Emu and Namakura Island. There's even a storm going on at the time in that scene. A big question that's not really talked about in the community is where is the original Van der Decken now? If he's said to be immortal and he's still travelling the bottom of the ocean, then we should be able to find him somewhere. We are told by Van der Decken the Ninth that the family holds a secret which involves Poseidon. The chapter where this is revealed is called Uninherited Will, which probably means Van der Decken the Ninth has misinterpreted his ancestors' intentions and as a consequence is now trying to capture Poseidon, at one point saying, "I must marry her first." This reflects Emu's intentions to marry Lily for immortality. My guess is Van der Decken the Ninth probably thinks that by marrying Poseidon, his ancestor first became immortal and is now trying to marry her to get immortality for himself. So the original Van der Decken was cursed around the time of the Void Century to wander for centuries in the sea. This actually resembles the punishment Zunisha faced for a great crime, perhaps telling us that the original Van der Decken was an ally of Joy Boys. Now, a deal with the devil to grant your desires is embodied by devil fruits, as they are physical manifestations of desire that give supernatural abilities. Shanks says, I once heard that devil fruits are incarnations from the sea devil. Oda confirms devil fruit users are weakened by the sea in an SPS, saying any body of water will do this because all water on the planet is essentially seawater in the bigger picture. So it seems that the devil and the sea have an intrinsic relationship, seeing as devil fruit users are said to be pulled to the bottom of the ocean. Vegapunk tells us in 1069 they earn the ire of Mother Nature, the sea itself. This means that the sea is angered by devil fruit users, which is why it pulls them into the depths, and suggests that it is because the power comes from the sea originally. There is a location in the sea that has trees that might have grown devil fruits called the Sea Forest. Joy Boy's promise to bring Fishman Island back to the sun implies the sea forest was once above sea level. It just so happens that the sea forest was introduced in the same arc as Vanderdecken, and it is deeply tied to Joy Boy. In fact, this is where Joy Boy debuted, amongst whales and a poneglyph that gave his name. There's a graveyard there, and Brooke tells us even the souls of the dead move along the underwater sea currents. And we can infer from that like everything else at the bottom of the ocean, they end up at the sea forest. This evokes the trees in Skypiea that house the souls of dead ancestors. The sea forest is dubbed the ship graveyard because, as I mentioned, everything that falls to the bottom of the ocean is taken there, much like Davy Jones' locker. This ties us to another mysterious being said to be at the bottom of the ocean in the One Piece world, just like the original Vanderdecken, which is Davy Jones. I mentioned there's a poneglyph in the sea forest, but 967 showed the reader something super interesting, which is that 20 years ago there was also a road poneglyph alongside it. This has since disappeared, probably taken by the man marked by flames, who is said to hold the last road poneglyph. This indicates the man marked by flames and Davy Jones are the same person. The sails of the Vanderdecken ship are black, matching that of the man marked by flames. Interestingly, Xebec said he was a follower of Davy Jones, and Vanderdecken the Knife's silhouette looks very similar to Xebec. Now we have Rox's reveal, we can see they have matching lightning bolts in their hair as well. The song Brooke sings about Davy Jones includes a diamond ring, symbolising marriage, perhaps pertaining to the original Vanderdecken and Poseidon. We were told Vanderdecken threw his crew overboard, which could be a reference to sailors that drown in the ocean and end up in the locker. So there's some uncanny ties between the Sea Devil, Vanderdecken the First, Xebec, and Davy Jones. It could be that the Sea Forest is Davy Jones' locker, which suggests that Joy Boy might be Davy Jones, or Vanderdecken the First was originally Davy Jones. However, there really isn't that much information telling us whether or not this character is actually a good character or a bad character, as far as I could find. In summary though, without a doubt, Emu is connected to the sea god and the devil in a way that seems like they're one and the same. This appears to be because the ancient kingdom made a deal with the devil in order for their dream to be granted, which may have been in the form of devil fruits. Emu was sacrificed in order to facilitate this trade, but ultimately Emu takes revenge and overthrows the ancient kingdom. However, Emu became just as bad as the ancient kingdom, mirrored when King Bakori tells his guards not to worry what people think about the atrocities they commit, as labels can be used to convince the people it's justified in chapter 1097. This is just like Emu and the world government do. Robin tells us fools who don't respect the past are doomed to repeat it, implying that years later Emu made a similar trade but using the soul of Lily Nefertari. In chapter 853, Luffy says the very woman Sanji is going to marry said she's going to kill him, which we can infer is a reversal of Emu marrying Lily with the intention of killing her. It could be that Lily was kept at Marijois by using hostages, because in the same chapter we see the quote, I tried to convince him to get away from this island at once, but Sanji was worried about the hostages in the East Blue. Alabasta is on the eastern side of the world, reflecting the Nefertari, implying Lily had a hard choice to make between staying at Marijois for the sake of the hostages or fleeing. More evidence that Lily was blackmailed to stay with Emu can be seen in the quote, as long as you don't run off, everything wraps up nice and tidy by Big Mum. In Whole Cake, Sanji is kept in a bedroom on the 6th floor, evoking a princess stuck in a tower. This could convey that Lily was kept in the flower room at Marijois, or perhaps on the 6th floor of Impel Down before the wedding. In chapter 854, we see before the wedding Luffy is imprisoned but breaks out, likely reflecting Joy Boy's circumstances during the Marijois wedding. Chapter 420 has a cover page that strongly alludes to this, showing a monkey in a cage while a wedding cake is being made. We know who is getting married because of the wax cake scene with Mr. Free in Little Garden. It shows Vivi on the one side and Nami on the other side, with Zoro forming a line in between them. This reflects the Western Kingdoms, so the Nefertari Kingdom in this case, and the Eastern Kingdom, as in the son of the royal family of the Ancient Kingdom, Emu. We know that it's Nami who represents this because of all the crowns we constantly see her wearing and tons of cover pages, which reflects Vivi as a princess. The wedding during the Whole Cake arc mirrors what happened during the wedding at Marishwa with Lily. Pudding says, at tomorrow's wedding, the entire Vinsmoke family will be put to death. In chapter 855, Bobbin says, at Mama's tea party, even the demons of hell make an appearance, foreshadowing that during the Marishwa wedding, the Gorosei and potentially others attacked the guests or the people that were at the wedding, with the intention of wiping out an entire family. It could be, though, that Joy Boy broke out because Luffy says in the following chapter, let's go crash this wedding. During this attempt to rescue Sanji and escape Whole Cake Island, Jinbei repeatedly states there are 10 members that are involved in the plan, suggesting Joy Boy and his crew tried to rescue Lily. So did Joy Boy manage to free Lily Nefertari from the wedding of the century? Guess you'll have to wait for the next video to find that out. From today's video though, we can summarise that just like the Ancient Kingdom did to Emu, Emu did to Nefertari Lily. The Ancient Kingdom used Emu as a sacrifice to perform a deal with the devil, and Emu took this idea but instead used Lily as a sacrifice, and for some reason a wedding was needed to facilitate that bond. Next time we'll look into whether or not Emu was actually successful in exchanging Lily's immortal soul for granting Emu's dream of revenge or whatever it is. Also, Luffy will smash this dream. Vegapunk says, I finally finished the Vega Force, a giant robot, the dream of mankind. And immediately after, Luffy gets sent straight through the Vega Force after being kicked by Kizaru. So Luffy is being shown to destroy the dreams of mankind here, which is Emu. Whitebeard foreshadows this in the quote, someday bearing the weight of all of these generations, a man will appear to change the world. Remember when Pikachu refused to use the Thunderstone to evolve? In the end, it turns out the tricks he learnt by not evolving were the exact tricks Pikachu needed to defeat Raichu. This is going to be the same for the Gods Knights, and here's why. Hey guys, it's Den. Today's video is pretty dense, so as usual I'll give a brief summary of the idea and then we can get into the deeper spice. In Elbaf, Holy Knights were introduced and they stand out mainly because of their ability to regenerate, like the Gorosei, making them particularly difficult to overcome. Scopper told us their haki was abnormal in chapter 1145, and notably they know about Emu and don't wear the helmets we see on celestial dragons, implying they have some sort of deeper connection to the hidden truths of the world. So far, all we know for sure is it's highly likely Emu can put an end to them at any time, just like we saw with Saturn. Additionally, Sakazuki said the group causes problems for the Marines when they get involved, so maybe we'll see some infighting as well. But how will the Straw Hats defeat a Holy Knight? Well, it seems that throughout the story the reader has been shown the exact process that needs to be undertaken to become a Holy Knight, and potentially even a Gorosei member. By understanding this, we can essentially highlight their weaknesses. Not only that, but when we look at the members of the Revolutionary Army, we start to get a pretty wild idea about how this all matches up. In chapter 1083, Dragon hints that the Revolutionary Army's final fight will be with the Gods Knights. Putting together both aspects, we discover that some abilities like Fishman Karate have been foreshadowed to defeat Gods Knights for good. So without further ado, make sure you're subbed and let's get cooking. Okay, diving straight in. What has Oda told us about becoming a Holy Knight? Looking at another secret faction of the One Piece world, Cypherpole, we can work out everything we need to know. First, Cypherpole agents probably start as children. This has been alluded to in Carmel's B-plot, where she sells young orphans to the world government, in particular to Cypherpole. This is all but confirmed by the cover page for 519 during the Cypherpole cover story, which shows children training. Each of these children look like other world government agents, echoing what we've seen before from Cypherpole relatives such as Kumadori's mum, who was an assassin, or Spandam. This suggests that the world government also sourced children from their own families, something that will tie in later as we see a lot of lore around families of Gods Knights introduced. What I'm referring to there is like their clan names, right? Like, so Myanmar, that was focused on. From here, the recruited children are taught the 6 powers, aka Roku Shiki. Lucci says, we are far beyond ordinary humans. Those of us in Cypherpole 9 have been training for as long as we can remember. We owned our skills to serve the world government and overcome the limits of a human body. We gained 6 superhuman fighting skills through that training, telling us that the 6 powers are gained through training over a long time. Also, we can see this training has kind of dissociated Lucci with humans. He believes he is superhuman or non-human. Nero is told by Lucci that without these powers, a person is just an ordinary human, after which he unalives Nero, showing us what happens to agents that don't complete this level of training. However, if the child succeeds, then they are given a devil fruit, foreshadowed by the world government forcing Boa and her sisters to eat zone fruits. The awakened zone prison guards of Impel Down contrast this, so we can see what happens if a Cypherpole agent doesn't succeed in this part of their training. Despite it not being acknowledged in the community much, we can see this is clearly the case when we match the prison guards to Carmel's orphans. If the candidate has gotten this far, it's likely they would be accepted into Cypherpole 9, the second to highest rank within the faction. The next rank up would be Cypherpole 0. We didn't get much chance to see what they were capable of, but what we do see is Lucci and Kaku both have awakenings after their promotion. This tells us that the highest level Cypherpole agents are given awakenings. Around the same time, we were introduced to the Holy Knights, implying they are the next rank up. We quickly learn that these characters have regeneration abilities and are almost unkillable. Lucci was shown last minute to side with the world government and return with Kaku to their forces on the ship, so this hints that Lucci might become a Holy Knight. Something that sticks out here is that Lucci has rebelled orders on multiple occasions before. The Holy Knights were explicitly shown to not have control over how they teleported to Elbaf, highlighted by Summers, who was not dressed appropriately when he arrives. So there could be a contrast later on around Emu's control over Lucci. Either way, it appears that if you have a devil fruit, are awakened, and have trained for long enough, then you get a chance to become a Holy Knight. Garling was the captain of the God's Knights, and he became a Gorosei member, showing us how you can complete the line all the way up to the top of the world government's forces. What's important here is that this particular range of techniques is mirrored by other abilities we've seen in the story. The big difference, however, is that these skills are scattered across the world, tucked away in rural locations. For example, one of the 6 abilities taught to Cypherpole agents is called Life Return. Life Return is the name of a technique explained to us by Kumadori to mean the complete control of one's own body. Kumadori uses this to control even his hair, which he fashions into sharp weapons. Chopper states he's heard of a similar ability to Life Return named Biofeedback. So Oda is showing us that you can do the same technique without the Cypherpole training. The same idea is echoed when Lucci changes his zone forms using Life Return, something Chopper initially achieved through Rumble Balls and later can perform without any medicine at all. So, Life Return is a technique taught to Cypherpole members through rigorous training and cold nurturing, but can be achieved outside the world government too. There's a subtle hint towards this that Oda included with Black Maria because she was a zone user that needed something akin to Rumble Balls to change her zone form. So perhaps this is because she hadn't had Cypherpole's Life Return training and hasn't developed her abilities through the same growth as Chopper, which we know because she was forced to eat her devil fruit by Kaido. Another ability we see Cypherpole agents use is absorption. Cypherpole members can quickly metabolize food, shown physically when a character blows up like a balloon and then suddenly shrinks. Without the Cypherpole training, however, Luffy, Bonnie, Loki and Kid have all been shown to do the same. If we go through the other powers, lo and behold, we discover they each have ties to a power from the outside world. So, there are powers around the world that reflect the training Cypherpole agents receive. But what does this have to do with defeating a God's Knight? Well, because if it's true, then like I mentioned with the Pikachu analogy, the God's Knights have likely had very sheltered, world government-based experiences and training. This might mean they haven't been exposed to the outside world so much, and so haven't learned as many techniques, let's say. If thematically culture beats the world government, then it will be manifested in these cultural-based moves being used, such as Fishman karate. Oda has shown this over and over again already in the story. A simple example to start with is with Zoro. Zoro defeats Kaku with swordplay. A young Zoro tells us that, when mastered, the Shimotsuki 2 sword style can cut through anything. Thematically, we see Zoro wins because of the reason he fights, which comes from his childhood, in contrast to Kaku's motivations, which is to serve the world government. So, through a certain childhood, Zoro gained a certain skill set and certain mindset to overcome a Cypherpole agent. This is what we mean when we say culture beats the world government. In the same arc, we see Spandam, whose plans get thrown off by Frankie. By overcoming his childhood trauma and finding his way into Water 7, he becomes Nakama with the Straw Hats, which gives him the strength to burn the blueprints to Pluton and avoid capture from the world government. Furthermore, Frankie's backstory is shown during the arc, revealing Frankie's development and natural skill in technology. So again, through a certain skill set developed as a child and a certain mindset developed as a child, Frankie is able to overcome a Cypherpole agent. Finally, around this time, Luffy defeats Lucci using Gear Second and saying he'd rather die than give up on his Nakama, echoing the exact same premise. So, in summary, because of the God's Knight's training, they are bound to a limited skill set and a limited mindset. But how does Oda manifest this in the story? Well, a Twitter user called Straw Hat UFO made a brilliant post where he theorizes that chapter 1146 revealed some very spicy hints. In the chapter, Nami says, "How could you let this happen, Jinbei? I thought we'd be okay with you here." After this, Jinbei replies saying, "Stop talking. I'm trying to think of how we're going to handle this ability." So Oda is foreshadowing here that Jinbei will eventually try some method, which will likely affect the God's Knights. So does Jinbei have a particular skill set and mindset he developed as a child? Well, yes, Fishman Karate is an art practiced primarily by members of the Fishman race, and was learned by Jinbei. It's a technique that controls water. Also in the same chapter we found out about the regeneration abilities of Gunko. What's interesting is this scene references chapter 629, the chapter where we first learn about Fishman Karate, which you can see when you put the panels side by side. So it's hard to notice at first, but when you look deeper you can see it's clearly intentional that these have been drawn the same way. The technique was learned by Robin from the Revolutionary Army. We also know that the Revolutionary Army has Fishman Karate practitioners such as Koala and Hack. Aside from the Revolutionary Army, there's another individual who fought against the might of Marie-Joie and lived to tell the tale, which is Captain of the Sun Pirates, Fisher Tiger. We could speculate that Fisher Tiger faced off against one or more of the God's Knights who guard the Holy Land. The original Twitter post suggests he survived not just based on his strength, but also based on Fishman Karate. So we know Jinbei has the special skill set, and in terms of mindset, he joined Luffy's crew, as opposed to Arlong, another Sun Pirate that instead chose to tax the weak and perpetuate the Celestial Dragon's evil ways. So our first prediction here is that Fishman Karate will be used by a Revolutionary Army member to defeat a Holy Knight. This might be because Fishman Karate is a technique developed outside of the world government's standard reach, which we see other examples for with different powers, and we'll go through them. In the same Twitter post, OP goes on to speculate about other abilities associated with the Revolutionary Army, such as Dragon Claw Fist. This is a technique with one known practitioner, Sabo, the Flame Emperor, and second in command of the Rev Army. He actually offered to teach the ability to Robin, so if this all works out, then Robin is looking primed to be a Holy Knight's worst nightmare, which may have been foreshadowed in a few colour spreads. A young Zoro tells the reader that mastering the Shimitsuki two-sword style can cut through anything, and while they have never been explicitly stated to have joined the Rev Army, Dragon did visit the island just over a decade ago. Later, however, the relationship is confirmed when we see the hidden city of Baltigo, and the Shimitsuki flag is among the factions shown on the banners. That said, these powers are not exclusive to Revolutionary Army members. Oda uses the Colosseum in Dressrosa to highlight these types of powers, for example with Don Chinjao, when he demonstrates Hashoken, which is a very similar looking ability to Life Return, one of the Cypherpole 6 powers. According to Gats, this fighting style allows the user to control the vibrations of the whole body, permitting them to create powerful shockwaves. These shockwaves are powerful enough to destroy a metal shield or easily defeat a strong character. These attacks are unblockable and reverberating, causing defenses to shatter, according to Sai. The significance is that the technique is a secret family technique spread over generations, so likely taught to the children of the family. Lao Ji is a master of a martial arts style known as the Jio-Ken. These techniques all revolve around his elderly state, and the ultimate technique of this style is to use Qi Gong, the principle of cultivating and balancing one's own spiritual energy, to conserve his physical vitality from back during his youth, which he can store up until he needs it, granting him access to immense strength once unleashed. It's implied that the user gets stronger the older they are, which contrasts the agelessness of the God's Knights, confirmed in 1155 when we saw Gunko look the same age decades ago. Both of these powers are seen amongst a load of other similar abilities used in the Colosseum mini-arc, and both show how there is a powerful technique in the world native to rural regions that aren't under the world government. These are the types of esoteric techniques that will be effective against the Gods Knights. Perhaps the most critical example is the strength of the giants of Elbaf, foreshadowed by Gunko, Herald and others to be the strength that will win the final war. Shamrock offered to recruit Loki, which is evidence towards this, so we can see the combat strength of rural communities seems to be particularly powerful again. We look at the Straw Hat crew to find abilities, considering the Straw Hats must also have some way of combating the Gods Knights, and using the same criteria we get an idea of who their opponents might be. I'll give an example. When the Straw Hats finally managed to land their first effective attack on a Gorosei member, it was Sanji using a love kick against Nuzjuro. It worked, not only preventing Nuzjuro from harming Bonnie by kicking him away, but it also hurt him. Now, we know it's not just love that's hurting the Gorosei, otherwise Senor Pink would be one-shot in every God's Knight in the verse. Instead, what ability did Sanji learn that's native to an island not under the world government, and can also be performed by a Revolutionary Army member? Akama Kenpo. Akama Kenpo is described by Ivankov as the ultimate form of fighting. It's a technique native to Kamabaka Kingdom, another location out of reach of the world government, and Eva, a commander in the Rev army, can also use the technique. Bon Clay expresses that being an Okama is part of the way of the human, and God's Knights have already shown their disdain for humanity. For example, Gunko says, "How dare you call me human" in chapter 1146. Sanji also learned his spin kicks from the spinning wheels in Onesi's Noodle Kenpo, so Sanji does seem to have some abilities native to cultures, and his childhood gave him the mindset to join the Straw Hats. Additionally, Sanji is shown to not fight women, embodied by his conflict with Black Maria, so if we had to make a prediction here, we could say that Sanji will use Akama Kenpo to overcome his inability to fight a woman, and in doing so the technique will be effective and will defeat the God's Knight. Maybe it's a reach, but we can go deeper and argue there's a case for why Sanji was paired up with Nuzjuro in the first place. Where is Nuzjuro from? Probably Wano, right? So in Wano we saw plenty of Okama, and its Japanese roots are the reason for the O at the start of the word Okama. Think Okiku. So there is a connection between Okama and the land of Wano, which is perhaps why Oda chose Sanji as the one to kick Nuzjuro, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Usopp learned pot greens from a mysterious figure at the Boyne Archipelago. Nami is equipped with lightning strikes, seemingly tied to the fairly isolated culture of Wavaria. Brook has music, which has been shown to manipulate the soul. Chopper has medicine that can reverse the effects of ice zombies, amongst other things, and his impressive skills as a doctor came from the rural region of Drum Island. Zoro has the Shimatsuki sword style, Frankie has impressive technology, and Jinbei has Fishman karate, all of which were developed as children in rural communities. Earlier we noted Robin was offered to train in some esoteric techniques, and there's some foreshadowing in cover pages that Robin might go on to command part of the Rev army or Grand Fleet herself. These unique traits are likely the key to overcoming the main antagonists of the Elbaf arc so far, and likely culminate in some special technique that will be used to defeat Emu. So let's put this into practice by predicting some matchups for the Straw Hats. We start with Sommer's Shepherd. Sommers was introduced in his underwear. Now, is there a Straw Hat that is often seen in his underwear? Well, yes, Frankie. Frankie is from the South Blue, a location we only ever see being really sunny or summery. This is highlighted by the palm trees we see every time the South Blue is shown. Frankie's shirt is covered in palm trees, for example, so it adds to this. Sommers is German for the word summer, evoking hot weather just like the South Blue, and his sunglasses add to the idea. The surname Shepherd is a typical biblical reference, and for those who haven't noticed, the South Blue is explicitly shown to be influenced by the Bible, such as with the church, Kuma and his dad both being pastors, and the Saint Brice having a biblical title in its name. The small crucifix in Summers' beard plays into this. Finally, Summers turns his right arm and sword into a more powerful weapon using his fruit, evoking serious Frankie vibes in the panel. As a quick aside, Frankie's number is 39, and Summers was introduced in 1140, perhaps suggesting that Summers' number is 40, one above Frankie, which is a common trope in One Piece with rivals. So it goes without saying, Frankie is pretty connected to Summers, and Frankie's skill is advanced technology, so we can predict that Summers will take on Frankie at some point, and his technology will play a role. Perhaps Summers' thorn fruit is ineffective against Frankie's metal body in some ways. But if I had to guess, I'd say the fight will probably reveal lore about Frankie's family having a rival clan in the South Blue, which will be the Shepherd clan. The next holy knight is Killingham. Killingham is a fishman, which we know for sure because of his gills. Killingham's introduced with a bubble hinting towards his need for certain air in certain environments, evoking a mix of fishman and celestial dragon. His eyes and mouth resemble Charlie and Praline, both of whom are sharks. Personally, I find this interesting because it means this holy knight is a shark. Emu has recently been hinted at by Oda alongside the picture of a shark as well as Brook's shark guitar. It gets spicier when we think that Arlong was a shark from the Sun Pirates who left the crew and taxed humans, perpetuating the world government's way of doing things. It's likely this is a reference to two opposing factions again, the mermaids versus the sharks, echoing the whole world government versus ancient kingdom vibe. Naturally, this tells us Jinbei would be the man for the job. He's connected to whale sharks, a peaceful animal whilst also being the biggest shark, contrasting Arlong. Jinbei wants to achieve Fisher Tiger's dream of equality between fishmen and humans, whereas Killingham, being a celestial fishman, goes completely against that perfectly. I think we could see Jinbei use Fishman karate to defeat him, perhaps using water to overcome Killingham and putting a twist on the weakness of devil fruits and the fact that Killingham's a fishman. This would make use of Jinbei's backstory as a sun pirate and a trait that's unique to his race. Gunko seems to play a larger role, which is much harder to predict, but we'll break down what we've seen so far. Unlike the other God's Knights, Gunko seems like more of a conduit for Emu. We can infer this because she uses arrows we've seen Emu use before. She's the girl from the throne room over 200 chapters ago, and she's literally used as a conduit at one point for Emu to take possession. We can see this demonstrated in the majority of her quotes, where she demeans humanity whilst referencing Emu as a divine god. Okay, so which Straw Hat really represents humans, repeatedly references how humans are weak and fragile, yet seems to supernaturally survive anything thrown his way? It's Usopp. His pop greens embody this, as they are shown to be plants that take human forms, such as the human mandrake. If Usopp somehow managed to defeat Gunko, then that would fit nicely with him becoming the warrior hero of Elbaf. And before you ask, yes, I've heard the theory Zoro might fight Gunko because he doesn't do well with directions, but thank you anyway. This leaves us with Shamrock, easily the hardest character to predict on a shallow level, with theories already flying around about his true identity and hidden lore. Rather than go into the sham sandwich, I'm going to just say Cerberus is a three-headed dog associated with hell and death, and Zoro has the three sword style and is associated with hell and death. I'll let you guys do the rest in the comments. Let me know if you think Shamrock will be an ally, enemy. Will he fight Blackbeard, Shanks, Garling? Yeah, just let me know. Anyway, since the earliest days of One Piece, could Oda have been creating the perfect team to fight the God's Knights? I'm predicting the abilities we've talked about will take Emu's forces by surprise, as Emu isn't aware they even exist, let alone their capacity or their capabilities, making use of some sort of blind spot the world government has. This is because these particular abilities were developed outside the reach of the world government, and so have adapted and survived for generations. Sabo, the chief of staff and second in command, is a master of the Ryo Soken martial art. Ivankov uses Akama Kenpo with unique abilities like the powerful Deathwing. Lindbergh, the commander of the South Army, uses a freeze ray gun and other advanced technology which we speculated earlier could damage a God's Knight. Bello Betty, commander of the East Army, uses the Kobu Kobu Nomi, a fruit that rallies and empowers people around her, significantly increasing their physical strength and morale, which could mirror how Emu uses the Abyss. It can't just be coincidence these guys all have unique abilities and are still yet to be shown in the story. One Piece is a multifaceted story. What we mean by this is that each important concept Oda focuses on is made up of a few different elements. For example, the One Piece treasure isn't simply a chest with gold inside, instead it has to be something that satisfies a few different criteria. In this case, it has to be something that ties to Joy Boy, the Will of D, the Void Sentry, Roger and Luffy. Recently, Emu introduced the concept of the world of Moo, and again this is a concept that has different aspects that make it up. A popular expression you might hear One Piece fans use is the phrase two sides of the same coin. This embodies the same idea, with a single concept having multiple parts to it. The most prominent example would be Luffy and Blackbeard, two characters both driven primarily by a dream, but the dreams are different and come from different places. A more subtle example of this can be seen with the concept of inherited will. While inherited will acts as a power that seems to motivate characters, such as Mont Blanc cricket, we see a flip side of this through curses. This is because curses act like inherited will in One Piece. They are passed down, causing people to act in ways that make them a villain. Vanderdecken 9 said his ancestor passed a family secret down to him. This is revealed in a chapter called Uninherited Will, and we see that it results in Vanderdecken trying to capture Shirahoshi. Each arc explores one or more of these concepts using B-plots and character arcs. This means that we can unpack questions we have about the mysteries and lore of the One Piece world by examining specific arcs. For example, if you want to look into rocks being revived, you'd probably check out the Thriller Bark arc, because that's an arc that features a lot of people being brought back from the dead. It can be hard after 30 years to remember all the information Oda has told us through the One Piece manga, question corners, and Vivre cards. We just alluded to the idea that every arc in One Piece has its own distinct message that acts as a puzzle piece, and as such, when we look back and put the puzzle pieces of each arc together, we see a clearer picture. This makes it far easier to see what the message of One Piece is. By recapping some key quotes and moments from each arc, we can kind of establish a theory of everything, which answers pretty much all the major questions fans have, such as what the One Piece treasure actually is. Additionally, while each arc has its own core theme, which we'll get into, there's some motifs that run throughout every single arc, without exception. A major example of this is a child's upbringing, which is something we see constantly from Mother Carmel's orphanage to Luffy growing up in a junkyard. To start, I want to look at the opening chapter, which encapsulates our point perfectly via the protagonist of the story, Luffy. As a child, Luffy stabs his own face to demonstrate his conviction to become a pirate, instigating a series of events that ultimately concludes with him fulfilling his dream and becoming Pirate King. The central theme to the opening chapter is setting up the traditional concept of a fool, establishing Luffy as our protagonist and the hero in this journey. Knowing what we know now, we can presume this chapter also gives us a little insight as to what Joy Boy was like as a child. So that's what we mean when we're saying we can look into One Piece mysteries by scanning over certain arcs. After the East Blue Saga, we reach the Twin Capes. Here we meet an old man that tells the reader lore about the world we're about to enter. This is the hermit archetype. In short, the hermit usually lives in seclusion and typically offers crucial knowledge, which Oda manifests here through Crocus, who explains the basic law of the Red Line, hinting that it's unnatural or shouldn't be there, through the island whale Laboon. Again, this could tell us about Joy Boy. It might mean that Joy Boy met someone at the beginning of his own journey, and that person could have bestowed some truths on him. Considering Laboon's there too, it's probably a whale or a person connected to whales that Joy Boy met. We could go further and speculate that Joy Boy met a whale Fishman, which was Davy, but we'll get into the deeper theory stuff in a second. The most important thing to note about the Twin Capes, however, is that it's the starting point of Luffy and his crew's journey. The reason this is important is because traditional heroes usually end their journey where they started, and considering the end of Luffy's journey is Laugh Tale, this is our first major clue at Laugh Tale's location. Just beside the Twin Capes, there happens to be a mountain with weird properties, so perhaps Laugh Tale's beneath Reverse Mountain. The Whiskey Peak arc is where we get our first deeper clues from the current timeline that tell us about the important events of the Void Century. During the short arc, the crew are offered hospitality when they arrive, only to find out later it was a trick and that they've been betrayed. So, during the Void Century there was a great betrayal which is reinforced by the mass gravesite that makes the hills appear as cactus. The next island is Little Garden, a bit of a personal favourite. There's an important motif we see introduced during this mini-arc. We meet two giants and we also see giant dinosaur skulls. So the reader is being told the island, ergo the One Piece world, is really old. This is around the same time we are introduced to the 1,000-year cycle of underwater volcanoes, which alongside the giants' century-long battle is our first proper introduction of the importance of cycles in the One Piece world, and how Luffy's arrival breaks these cycles. Just for some extra context, the underwater volcanoes are said to erupt roughly every 1,000 years, creating, destroying and moving islands. Its significance is touched upon later in the story, when we learn about special currents that mix when underwater temperatures change. Ultimately, we arrive at Alabaster, where the world government warlord Crocodile carries out Project Utopia over Alabaster, without the knowledge or go-ahead from his world government superiors. Secret agents carry out undercover operations to unsettle the country and overthrow the current royalty, much like what we see with Doflamingo and the Riku family. The message Oda is conveying here is that during the Void Century there was strife amongst royalty and a rebellion took place, with secret agents performing underhanded tactics and betrayals. Okay, so rather than go through every arc, I'm going to talk about one mystery at a time, and we'll use the same framework to find the answers. For example, the biggest mystery in the story has got to be what the One Piece treasure actually is. Some of the following comes from a conversation I had with a member in our Discord called Kakatan, so big thanks to him, and keep an eye out for an upcoming hour-long video we have coming out together very soon. The idea is based off of two theories I've posted before, which were that the One Piece is a heart, and that also the red line is a massive petrified tree. It might sound a little weird at first, but I'll explain what I mean, and hopefully by the end of the video you'll agree, or at least have something to add to the idea, and we can finally put this whole One Piece treasure mystery to rest. Now, there's two parts I'm going to explain. Firstly is what the treasure is and how we find this out. Secondly, I'll talk about what the implications are for this and how there's clues all over the One Piece world, including the red line itself. So, what is the One Piece treasure? A little while ago, I put out a video explaining how it's highly likely the One Piece treasure, or at least part of it, is a heart. In the video I go into detail, but to summarize the premise, it's that throughout the story we see a recurring focus on hearts and heartbeats. Towards the end of the theory, I explained how the heart must be special in some way, as to not deteriorate over centuries, which is what Brook's body did after just 2 years. One viewer commented on the video highlighting that the One Piece treasure has to be timeless, which echoes this idea. So, the One Piece treasure is a timeless heart. Timelessness is actually an important aspect that we see throughout One Piece, for example, with the Gorosei that appear the same age throughout the centuries. This was confirmed when we saw Saturn during the Emeth incident at Marijoa. We also saw Saul put in Aokiji's time capsule, which is another example of timelessness that Oda has included in the story, this time pertaining to being frozen. Boa turns people to stone with her devil fruit if they're attracted to her, and we even see stone hearts coming out of her victims' chests sometimes. In myth, timelessness relates to petrification, which can be symbolized by stone. An easy example of this that many are likely familiar with is in Game of Thrones, when we see 3 dragon eggs petrified for centuries that are reborn after being taken into a fire. So basically, petrified or timeless things are undone by fire and born anew. Okay, so with all of that in mind, I'm now going to completely unravel what we think the One Piece treasure is, with all the evidence I could find. Also, we'll be diving briefly into Davy's version of the One Piece treasure. I think the One Piece world has 2 stones that are pretty much key to balancing the world out. Like I said, this might sound strange and kind of out of nowhere, but I'm going to give all the evidence I've found and you can see what you think from there. To start, we need to quickly establish that Emu is connected to the One Piece treasure. Whitebeard says, "In the future, someday, someone will appear, carrying the history of all those decades on his back, and challenge this whole world to a fight. Sengoku, you guys in the world government all fear that immense battle engulfing the whole world that will eventually come. I don't care myself, but as soon as someone finds that great treasure, the entire world will be turned upside down, and someone will find it. That day will come sooner or later." Since the Elbaf flashback, we know that when Whitebeard says the world will be flipped upside down, he's talking about the world of Moo, and he's saying this in relation to the One Piece. So we know that Emu is connected to the One Piece treasure. So what is the treasure? Throughout the story, Oda references the human heart. After all, One Piece was originally named Romance Dawn, and romance is an aspect associated with the heart. The previous Pirate King talked about hearts, saying, "Destiny, fate, dream. These unstoppable ideals are held deep in the heart of men. As long as there are people who seek freedom in this life, these things shall not vanish from the earth." We get a huge clue from the first panel of the story as well. If we look at panel 2, we see that Roger has 2 blades crossed just below his chin. However, if we go back and look at panel 1, this is not what we see. Instead, Oda has the blades crossing off-center to the right. This is clearly the position where Roger's heart would be. So in panel 1 of the entire story, we are being shown what the One Piece is. Luffy says, "Power isn't decided by your size, but by the size of your heart and dreams." Funnily enough, this fits the age-old pirate saying me hearties. Sogeking told the reader the island of snipers is in your heart, perhaps referring to Laugh Tale as the island of snipers. The onomatopoeia for a heartbeat is often depicted, for example, in a few scenes with Hody Jones. Imagery is also used, such as in the first Lucci fight, where Luffy punches Lucci in the heart. It's subtle, but the same can be seen with Cobra's death, where an arrow seems to pierce him through the heart from behind. That said, it's the quotes that give us the details about what Oda is alluding to with all this heart symbolism. Even in less important scenes it comes up, such as in chapter 755, in the quote, "It's nothing more than puppy love, and we're nothing more than heartbreakers." Tashigi and Smoker have their hearts switched in chapter 661. In the same chapter, the Straw Hats have their hearts switched around, causing the crewmates that are affected to switch personalities. Bear in mind the chapter number here. It's about to become very important. The devil fruit that causes this is heart-shaped. The person with this switching ability is also the captain of the Heart Pirates and has a large heart tattoo on his chest. The person who connects this ability to the treasure of Marie Joie is Doflamingo, who sits on the heart seat. His brother wears a heart-covered shirt and is called Corazon, which means heart. Oda explicitly showed both God Enel and Luffy's hearts restart. We see clues to the significance of hearts scattered across the blue planet. Lovesickness is a prominent disease in the story which ties to the heart. Herald also has a sickness of the heart. Crocus said that Laboon is a whale with a human heart. Law has his heart stolen and kept in a box by Caesar. Caesar drops some super foreshadowing when he says, "Give your heart to me, then our deal will be sealed." So, there is imagery suggesting some removal of a heart. Zoro tells us that being removed from your heart is what takes you to hell in the quote. "I've had this feeling before. Everything around me was eerily silent. My heartbeat was like distant thunder. It was like standing at the gates of Hades." So, the removal of a heart in One Piece connects to hell. Of course, hell is connected to Emu through the abyss. So, if the One Piece is a removed heart of some kind, and this ties to hell, which fulfills the criteria we started with when Whitebeard said the One Piece will turn the world upside down. If someone finds the One Piece treasure and it's Emu's heart, this of course would change the world hugely. Okay, so we're definitely cooking, but remember I said the chapter number 661 was very important. Well, the reason for this is because Vivi's name fits Roman numerals. Nerona, Emu's name, is also Roman. What I mean by this is Vivi is VI, which makes 66. Lily is LI. In Roman, L means legion, which is 50, so Lily is 50, 151, which again makes 66. It might sound complicated, but this is super important because it shows that Lily, Vivi, and Emu are all tied to the number 66, and chapter 661 is all about having hearts removed. So, we infer from this, Lily's heart was removed, switched with Emu's, and now Emu's heart is elsewhere, ergo, the One Piece treasure at Laugh Tale. It could be that the OP powers were used before this, so we can assume Emu does want to top up her vitality using Vivi in some way. We saw a girl offered up as an offering to 4 gods in the sky in chapter 287, and the elder is shown to be called Pantori. We see a girl offered as a sacrifice to the devil, summoned on Earth in Namakura Island in chapter 524, and the elder here is Pakori. So Oda is showing us gods are in the heavens above, which is the clouds, and the devil is down below, as in the sea. In an SBS in chapter 854, someone asks, "What is a heart full of belief?" Oda answers, "It could be, for example, the strength of mind to not be led astray by the deceptive lies of adults who cannot admit their own mistakes." Telling us Emu has been led astray by the adults that brought him up, which has led him to this point. It's also echoed by Vander Decken in a chapter called Uninherited Will, where he reveals he has inherited a family secret. It's actually chapter 606 where we learn about the original Vander Decken being cursed by God, evoking the 66 again. Roger says, "A child is not responsible for the sins of the parents." And in chapter 858, Caesar says to Luffy, "My only escape from certain death was this guy taking control of my heart and making me his slave." Furthermore, Judge says, "Are you my sacrifice, Sanji?" So it's implied that it's not really Emu's fault, but instead Emu is a product of something else. In 1099, King Bakori returns to Sorbet 16 years after the Revs liberated it, and he states, "A wise king must steal his heart and enact cruel reforms." So perhaps Emu's perspective has something to do with being king. Neptune says, "Traditions that overstay their welcome become curses." So the reader can decipher that Emu has been around for too long, as well as Emu's ideals, and the world of Moo, and subsequently has become a curse on the world. We speculate Emu has done this by removing his own heart. In a practical sense, this seems to have given Emu the power of the abyss somehow, rather than killing him as it would a normal person. This aligns with Hiruluk's speech when he says, "When does someone die? When their heart stops?" No. Emu has then used this power to bestow the same immortality on certain followers, such as the Gorosei, implying they are also heartless in some way. In other words, Emu made a deal with the devil and is making other people undertake the same deal. We see this manifested particularly with Kuma, whose situation leads him to say, "I would make a deal with you to save Bonnie's life, even if you were the devil." A child says to Bonnie in 1097 that she's a vampire and can't come into the light, suggesting a consequence of such a deal means Emu can no longer leave Marijois into the sun. So there definitely seems to be consequences to Emu's deal for immortality. Remember how earlier I started with a Whitebeard quote? Well, it's not the only one that's important here. He also says, "I am only one man with one heart. Call me a demon, call me a monster, but I can't be the strongest forever." I personally believe this is Oda underlining that no matter what you do and what deals you make, you can't live forever alone. You need more than one person. Well, there has to be more to the whole heart thing, because what happens if you take someone's heart and leave it in a box for 800 years? It would deteriorate and turn to dust, as we see with Brooke. So there's an additional element, something that unnaturally preserves this heart for a long time. In Kuma's flashback in Sorbet Kingdom, Kuma is called a blessing. He's said to have miracle hands and only heals people on a Sunday, the holy day, which are all examples of Kuma's connection to the Bible. The fact Kuma heals people for free contrasts the world government, who demands tributes from those who are struggling, shown on the very next page. It's explained Bakori is a cruel man with a heart of stone and that he's dividing the nation. The townspeople say, if we get sick, we can't pay the heavenly tribute, and the effect the world government has on the world is often described as a sickness, so we can see a cycle here. The world government demands a heavenly tribute, but also causes the same people to not be able to pay that tribute. This example describes King Bakori as having a heart of stone, and defines what that means. He's a parallel for the world government and Emu, suggesting that the One Piece might be Emu's stone heart. I won't go to quantum levels to explain the stone stuff, but basically Pika has the stone fruit, and Pika sounds like a child. So we are seeing Oda connecting stone to childlike characters. There's a stone statue that resembles Emu's form in the Sky Islands. The red line is probably the most prominent stone feature in One Piece, and also signifies petrification. Another example would be the ancient poneglyphs, which have petrified a message in time, only to later be heard by the fiery wills of Roger, Odin, and Luffy. So there are some references to stone in One Piece, but I left out one important one, which ties back to what I said at the beginning. If stone really is supposed to be important for some reason, then it would add a lot of significance to Seastone. A stone that encapsulates the essence of the sea seems completely in the wheelhouse of what we're talking about here, as Emu spelled backwards is Umi, meaning sea, and there are so many theories around Emu's connection to the sea. Davy is of course also connected to the sea, and we know Emu has beef with the Davy clan, but we'll dive deeper into that later. For now, let's just focus on the One Piece treasure being a stone heart. There could be another aspect to the stone heart, which is gold, but that's covered in detail by a YouTuber called Grand Linebound, so head over there and drop a comment saying I sent you. He's hilarious. But moving on. So, what is a stone heart symbolic for in One Piece? We break this down into two halves. Firstly, why a heart? Oda uses the heart as a catch-all to symbolize the many aspects of humanity and the human experience. These aspects include love, fear, conviction, imagination, and bonds between nakama. In One Piece, humanity can manifest as powerful abilities. Most importantly though, the heart is conflicted. Conflicted hearts probably play a bigger role than it first sounds. We started the video by talking about a couple of arcs and their themes, but one theme that runs throughout every arc in one way or another is betrayal. We can use this to understand how Oda depicts conflicts of the heart. The Iron Giant's first words were, "I'm sorry." Zunisha shares a similar sentiment, as she fulfills her punishment for a mysterious crime committed centuries ago. Even Joy Boy said he was sorry to Poseidon. Luffy said sorry just before his imminent death at the hands of Buggy. The Going Merry said sorry for not being able to take the Straw Hats the entire journey. Bonnie says sorry to Vegapunk right before he dies. Guess what Ace says to Luffy right before he dies? Again, he says, "I'm sorry." This pattern of apologies shows us that betrayal comes up a lot. But why are so many important characters saying sorry? And why do most of them die shortly after? Betrayal is a recurring theme in One Piece, profoundly affecting how the story takes shape. We saw Stussy betray Cypher Pole, causing Kaku to get emotional. Corazon, which means heart, betrayed Doflamingo. Nico Robin defied Crocodile in the Alabaster arc to side with her future Nakama. Similarly, Sanji appears to betray his crew during the whole Cake Island arc by leaving them to marry Pudding and support the Vinsmoke family. However, this act is driven by coercion from Big Mom and his intent to protect his crew and Zeph. So, does this mean whatever big betrayal took place happened out of coercion? One of the biggest betrayals of the story is from Kurozumi Kanjuro, one of the 9 Red Scabbards, who deceives his allies for years and reveals his allegiance to Kurozumi Orochi during the raid on Onigashima. This follows a long line of treachery within the Kurozumi clan, highlighting the theme once again. Caribou, a minor antagonist, is known for repeatedly betraying his crewmates for personal gain, demonstrating his self-serving nature, ultimately ending up serving Blackbeard. Well, at least for now. During the Marineford War, Squad betrays Whitebeard under the false belief that Whitebeard has sold out his allies to the Marines, manipulated by Akainu. So here we see a case of someone betraying a major character because they thought that character had already betrayed them. Squad later regrets his actions after realizing the truth, foreshadowing that some misunderstanding or coercion was indeed involved in whatever major betrayal took place centuries ago. Caesar Clown feigns alliance with the Straw Hats in the Punk Hazard arc, but intends to use them for his experiments, highlighting his disloyalty. Drake, a member of the Worst Generation and Kaido's Beast Pirates, is revealed to be a secret agent for the Marine unit known as Sword, betraying Kaido and siding with Luffy's alliance during the Wano Country arc. Sword in general is a pretty defiant branch within the world government, with Admiral Fujitora and Garp bending orders while not directly betraying the world government. Betrayals like these tell us information about what Oda is trying to communicate through motivations and relationships. Okay, so betrayal is a prominent motif in One Piece and is an aspect of humanity through the conflict of the heart. That said, like we said right at the beginning, we can use these recurring themes to find a pattern which should tell us why betrayal is so important to the actual narrative. To be honest, we probably do have enough info to pretty much comprehensively predict what happened during the Void Century. I've spoken before about Joy Boy and Emu being brothers, and that one option is Joy Boy was valued as heir to the throne of the Ancient Kingdom and the prophesied return of Nika. I think Emu was the second son and instead was given away to some faction of the Ancient Kingdom, instead of taking place at the royal court. While Joy Boy was living it up as prince, blissfully ignorant, Emu was suffering under the growing oppression of the Ancient Kingdom, likely manifested as experiments that took place on Emu as a child. This type of angle would explain why Emu is so bitter and twisted. If you're familiar with the channel, you'll know we predicted a special wedding took place, which could be where this great betrayal happened, foreshadowed in a ton of quotes and imagery, particularly in the Whole Cake arc. We also theorized there was an important civil war similar to that in Alabaster. The two sides will be the D clan and the Celestial Dragons. Emu potentially escaped during this conflict, which is when Emu infiltrated the 20 kingdoms. As an insider, Emu plays the most crucial role during this civil war. As a member of the Great Kingdom's royal family, Emu used his knowledge of the ancient weapons to steal Uranus. Emu uses it against Enies Lobby, thereby framing the Ancient Kingdom for the destruction of Enies Lobby and the subsequent earthquakes and mass flooding. This is the final encouragement for the world to go against the Ancient Kingdom's royal family. So we can see this instead could be the ultimate betrayal of the Void Century, as it led to the downfall of the Ancient Kingdom. Now in complete power, Mural is built. Emu makes it illegal to travel the world, so the people of the world don't learn of Emu's origins and all that jazz. This is how Joy Boy became the first pirate. At some point, Lily learned the truth about Emu's plans. Despite being bound to Emu through lovesickness, which is a sickness that affects the heart, Lily flees Merijois and arrives at Amazon Lily, aware her separation will lead to her death. It'll be interesting to see if Lily stole Emu's stone heart, which later leads to Joy Boy stashing it away at Laughtail. The distance between Emu and Lily makes the pair intensely sick. I'm pretty keen to find out for sure, but it could be that Emu used the advanced technology of the Ancient Kingdom to sustain him, but Lily dies from lovesickness. The permanent loss of Lily leaves Emu in a weakened state that cannot be maintained by technology, known as sickness of the heart. Like every Joy Boy figure, we know Joy Boy came back down the Grand Line at some point, so perhaps it was news of Nefertari Lily's death that causes Joy Boy to return to Merijois to confront Emu. One speculation we could make is Joy Boy learned from Emu about Emu's weakened condition from lovesickness, and so is met with the choice to simply do nothing and let Emu die, or sacrifice his life to revive Emu. Not being able to live with the death of his younger brother, Joy Boy sacrifices willingly and Emu performs the immortality surgery. This restores Emu, but only partially due to the permanent absence of Lily and also potentially the guilt. This would be another candidate for the moment Emu had his heart removed and taken to Laughtail. I'm just putting some educated guesses out there, so make sure to comment if you have a reference or an idea that sounds better. Alright, sweet, so that's a little summary, but that's literally the tip of the Void Century iceberg. Tons of mysteries in the current timeline we see when reading chapter to chapter link back to the Void Century, some of which are pretty direct, others are crazy rabbit holes that reveal crazy twists and turns. Firstly, evidence Joy Boy existed during the Void Century is hinted at throughout the story. But Vegapunk confirmed Joy Boy was alive at the end of the Void Century during his speech. Evidence Emu existed at the same time can be seen pretty clearly in Emu's reaction to Emeth releasing Joy Boy's haki. We can presume they were siblings because of the heavy focus on the recurring theme of sibling rivalry, going as far as to include royalty in the Elbaf example of Harjudin and Loki. Second sons drawing the short straw has been a common theme in literature for centuries, usually surrounding the fact they don't inherit their parents' titles and estate. In Game of Thrones, there's an entire army made from second sons. Lily's brother was a second son that we were told reluctantly inherited the Alabaster throne after Lily's disappearance. We also learned this was not well received by the people of Alabaster. One element that seems to be important is that Emu was probably given away at some point, like the prince at Lamb's house and Sanji's backstory. If I had to guess, I'd say it's most likely Emu was given to the Ancient Kingdom as a baby. This would explain why Joy Boy, as true-born heir, would be valued over Emu. A rift between royal family factions can be seen in the Riku Don Quixote family feud. During Dressrosa, Neptune told us in chapter 649, there was once a man called Joy Boy, and ties the name to a promise to liberate Fishman. This clues the reader into Joy Boy's nature. We see this mirrored in the current storyline through Luffy, who often liberates people. As such, Emu suppresses any knowledge of Joy Boy. In contrast, Emu hides his own name. Cobra's fate was said to be sealed the moment he saw Emu, highlighting the consequences of knowing the secret. Additionally, it's probably worth mentioning at some point there was a leak, and the truth about Emu nearly got out. I'll leave you guys to draw parallels for this from scenes we've already seen in the story to work it out, but one option might be someone saw something through that little peephole. You can be 100% sure Oda didn't add such a specific detail just for Walpole to coincidentally see the most hidden character in the world through. Okay, so you can see how we can use the patterns of motifs to speculate on what might have happened during an otherwise hidden period of history. Before making some big conclusions, I'm going to throw some additional information and evidence out there and we'll see if it inspires any thoughts. For example, another option we've speculated on the channel before is that Joy Boy was inspired by stories, eventually fleeing his duties for a life of freedom at sea. This matches what we see with the Bragmen tales, Nolan's Book of Lies, Usopp's Lies, and the Harley myth, to name a few. Leaving a kingdom and ultimately joining the people because of it reflects Buddha's story, something we see echoed by Luffy's forms. Similar to the story of Buddha, with the heir to the throne gone, it creates a power vacuum, and factions emerged. Those loyal to the ancient kingdom's royal family became the early members of the later known D clan, while others aligned with the rebellious forces who wanted to overthrow the current regime, ultimately becoming the 20 Kings Alliance. This is why we see Sorbet Kingdom physically split in two, as it evokes imagery of division and the effects it has on the local characters. Quotes like the one in chapter 395, where Robin says, "There was a massive war. The 20 kingdoms rose up against a single enemy. The Great Kingdom," confirmed there was in fact a great war which affected almost the entire world, added to by Vegapunk's speech. The gravestones on Whiskey Peak tell us the losses were great. Vegapunk alludes to the idea that whatever happened caused a huge rise in sea levels, essentially creating the blue planet we see today. This chaos is framed on the ancient kingdom as the aggressor, pushing the 20 kingdoms to unify against them. Being framed or misrepresented as evil is a super common trope in One Piece, with a range of examples, including when Morgan said Luffy kidnapped Vegapunk, and when Sabo is stated to kill Cobra. But most of you are probably pretty familiar with how propaganda works in One Piece. Alright, so there's a few bits about the Void Century. But let's connect the Void Century to hearts properly, so we can really establish that the One Piece treasure is a stone heart from the Void Century. So we have a wedding that definitely fits with the idea of a heart. Love sickness could be a product of this wedding. The previous Empress of Amazon, Lily, died of love sickness and is revered for her choice not to stay on Amazon Lily. Gloriosa says in chapter 516, "Love sickness has killed many of us." This is opposed to Shaki and Gloriosa, who disapprovingly left to be with the one they love. It's likely Lily is deeply connected to the island, as it contains her name, and everyone on the island is named after flowers, and a lily is prominently the flower of death. So it's likely Lily died due to love sickness after not returning to Emu and Marijois. Naturally, love is an aspect of romance and the heart, not to mention humanity. As a side note, Amazon Lily is in the Calm Belt and is explicitly stated to not have any adverse weather conditions. We know that love is described as a hurricane, so this tells us Amazon Lily is somewhere love can't grow. This is because there's only women. In other words, Lily ended up isolating herself from her human side, just like Emu did. I've spoken about it before in depth, but I'll briefly cover the sickness of the heart Hiruluk mentioned as it's relevant here. It could be that Hiruluk also had love sickness, but he instead called it a sickness of the heart. His cure was to martyr himself for a greater cause, the traditional definition of a hero. Lily did the same, sacrificing herself for the greater good. It's likely Joy Boy did the same, sacrificing his own life to guarantee Imu's undoing. Law in chapter 761 says, "The person who has the Ope Ope no Mi can grant eternal life to someone else at the cost of their own." So it could be that Joy Boy actually sacrificed himself to save Emu, which might be the twist Rayleigh alluded to. So there's a pattern of heart sicknesses and sacrifice. Sacrifice is of course a recurring motif in the story, most memorably with Ace perhaps. On a side note, a while back I actually speculated about the idea that Ace's mother, Rouge, died from some form of love sickness, but we move on. So far we've established hearts are super relevant in One Piece. Not only that, but it's likely the One Piece treasure is a heart that's been removed in a deal with the devil, and as such the heart has been petrified and no longer burns with will. Now, this is where things get a little more interesting. At the beginning I said, I think there are two important stones. If one of them is Emu's heart, then what's the other? In chapter 924, Hawkins tells us Seastone originates from Wano. I always found this strange because Wano is made up of other countries since 800 years ago, and the world government hasn't had Seastone that long. I believe this hints that at some point the world government got Seastone from somewhere else. In chapter 169, Smoker tells us Seastone can be thought of as a physical embodiment of the sea. The sea is associated with Davy Jones, and Davy is associated with God Valley. The world government went to God Valley under the pretense of a valuable resource. This could be Seastone. Seastone weakens devil fruit users, and in our Davy deep dive, we showed Davy and devil fruits are very connected. So what I'm suggesting here is that Emu has a stone heart, aka a heart of earth. In contrast, Davy's soul could be stuck in Seastone. Where it gets into a whole new rabbit hole is how our protagonists go about breaking these two stones. The answer for both is with fire. And with that, I'm going to leave it as a cliffhanger for next week. So in this video, we established Emu went through some trauma, betrayed the ancient kingdom, took Lily's heart and hid it somewhere, potentially Laughtail. That's all we've got time for today, but in the next part, we'll go deeper into how fire will undo this stone heart by bringing in the era of the sun. To give you a clue, here's a quick question. Where does the sun live? In the clouds. What happened to punk records that contain the true history? It went into the clouds. Vegapunk said the world would flood, so where's everyone going to go? Perhaps the people of the blue planet will move back into a new age of heavens called the Age of the Sun, but we'll leave the rest for the next video. Finally, I'll finish by adding that if the historical events of the Void Century are the most significant, then surely we should be looking at the time before the Void Century to find out what led to such an important mystery. The poneglyphs were made in Joy Boy's time, as we know from his apology to Poseidon, so maybe Joy Boy wasn't recording the history of the Void Century, but instead the history of what happened before the Void Century. This would give context to the fact the poneglyphs are said to contain the true history of the world. So what if the Void Century is a red herring, and the real truth is what came before it? Next week, we'll explicitly explain what the Rio poneglyphs detail, what actually happened before the Void Century, and why it is important to the ancient kingdom's origins. If you did want a deeper look at anything we spoke about today, we have videos on each one, so feel free to check them out. In the last video, we uncovered that the One Piece treasure is a stone heart by following the core themes and motifs of the One Piece story. Today, though, we are going to look at how Oda has foreshadowed the heart will be destroyed, and the effects this will have on the One Piece world. In myth, it's always fire that brings an end to petrification. Putting a dragon egg into fire causes it to hatch. So why fire? Well, because fire and heat transform matter from one state to another, such as liquid into gas. As such, fire has long represented the spirit of man and its transformation to a different plane. This is how we get the term Promethean flame. It's a myth about humans striving to reach God or godlike technology just to destroy themselves with it, completing the cycle. So does this mean burning Emu or Marijois will hatch the new era? Marijois sits above the Eve tree, and we're currently seeing the Adam tree on fire. It could be that the Eve tree will also be burnt down, which could also be the end to Emu, allowing for the new age. Might sound basic, but think of it like this. Imagine that the red line, in fact, is the Eve tree. I'm talking the entire thing. A huge overgrown tree, just like we saw Greenball create, but instead turned into stone. We covered this in depth in the red line theory if you want quotes and foreshadowing that tell us this. Moving on though, this would mean if the Eve tree burns, the red line will come down. It's not a coincidence we see Sabo almost burn Emu in the throne room, or that Kaido and Big Mom fell into lava. There's a significance to burning in One Piece that Oda has woven into the background, like many other subtle details. A good way to put it into the context of the human experience is through the phrase burning passion. Sanji tells us passion burns hotter than any flame. A burning passion is opposite of Emu's cold vibe, which is to keep everything the same until it stagnates. So it's implied in the story that flames, like in myth, facilitate a transformation, but Emu is the opposite of this and keeps everything frozen in time, like the Straw Hat in Marijois. Doflamingo is a parallel of Emu and says, whatever the tragedy or the blunder is, only the things that actually happened are written in stone, suggesting fire can undo tragedy and blunders that are otherwise set in stone. Interestingly, there just so happens to be an important flame in the story, which is the Mother Flame. I've touched on it before, but I still strongly believe it was Luffy's heartbeat that turned on the Mother Flame. However, I do think there's some conditions that have to be satisfied for this to take place. The reason for thinking this is because Emeth didn't wake up when Luffy turned into Gear 5 the first time, only the second time. One possibility is the simple matter of the size of Luffy's heart. Each time we saw Emmet react to the drums of liberation, it was around the time Luffy had increased the size of part of his body, ultimately ending with Luffy going giant mode. We know blood is pumped differently when Luffy shifts into other gears, so it could genuinely just be a case of the drums of liberation being loud enough to fully get Emmet's attention. It was when Luffy was full giant-sized, when Emmet jumped back out the sea toward Walkery, so it's a possibility. If this is the case, then it fits with Luffy's heartbeat causing a transformation in something that's otherwise completely stagnant. I would give some examples from the story here of stagnation in relation to stone, but seeing as we covered it in the last video, this time we'll look at ice examples instead. Ice is another important form of petrification in One Piece. Soul was frozen in Kuzan's aptly named Ice Time capsule. It was the flames of Ohara that eventually freed him, allowing him to reveal the true events to the Straw Hat crew. Something sinister happened to the old ship company, which are implied to be the ones frozen under Punk Hazard currently. Additionally, Garp is frozen. Fans of the channel will know I've spoken for a long time about Garp being revived with Sebek's will. This would be another example of thawing someone with fire and it causing a transformation. This would reveal the true history surrounding the God Valley incident. As such, I doubt it's a coincidence Oda had Kuzan, the only ice user under the world government, defect from his position. This prevents the world government from refreezing things in the narrative. If fire does really unpetrify or unfreeze things in the One Piece world, then we can look at the icy locations we've seen in the story to see where transformation should take place. The most poignant example here would be Drum Island, which literally shares the same name as Luffy's special heartbeat. If Drum Island was to melt, then it could reveal giant trees that have been cut down, as we've discussed on the channel before. A character featured in the Drum arc is Kureha, known for her secret of youth, which aligns with her being the oldest living standard human in the story. Notice anything strange about the way she dresses? She's dressed as if she's hot. Every couple videos I mention Kureha is pretty hot, but this time we're talking about body temperature for a change. It's implied Kureha has a fire burning inside her. We see something very similar with Sanji, which is for the most part the actual reason why he can't control himself around women. He's a cyborg with super strong human emotion, and as a product, we see flames come off his kicks. This again evokes the Sanji quote, connecting flames with passion, as it's Sanji's raw emotion that is igniting his leg, not friction. Perhaps this gives us a clue as to why Sabo's flames didn't work. Maybe there's some connection or passion that's missing. Sanji has a scene where he gets enraged and says, "Let me burn these experiences from my mind," right after Wadastumi points out he is on fire. This ties burning to removing past trauma, or in other words, removing Emu with fire. We can look at some interesting conversations about what happens when Emu does eventually get defeated. Earlier I mentioned dragons being symbolic for the transformation of an era. Often represented by the color purple, we see all the purple volume covers with Kaido on. So Kaido was the dragon that facilitated Luffy's transformation into Gear 5. However, the point is that there's a character called Dragon, and he just so happens to be the father of the protagonist. So if Emu burns, it may be Dragon who burns her, and with that, Dragon may also die too. Okay, so we've just touched on a lot of different topics, and there are some other angles to get into too, but now make sure you're subbed, and let's jump straight into some quotes and foreshadowing so we can start cooking up this whole fire motif that's probably been painfully overlooked by most of us. Fire is a recurring motif in One Piece. We see it in the epithet man marked by flames. Our protagonist has the sun god fruit, and both his brothers had the flame fruit. Vivre cards burn up as someone's life force reduces. Fire is always shown in scenes featuring gods, for example at the sacrifice in Skypiea. And Wano features tons of burning, such as Orochi literally being burned to a crisp. Some of the most important clues about how Oda uses fire come from more subtle references, however, such as attacks that certain characters have. We see this with Zoro, Katakuri, Sanji, Doflamingo, and Luffy, to name a few. If I were to ask what causes Sanji's leg to ignite, I get a ton of replies saying friction. However, this is not the case, explicitly demonstrated in a few scenes, such as when he fights Luffy. So even without moving, i.e. no friction, Sanji can set his leg on fire. What's different about him compared to his siblings? He's the only one out of them all that the lineage factor experiment didn't work on, which Oda confirms in an SBS, going as far as to say, this is why Sanji has the same hair color as Judge. Additionally, these fiery attacks somewhat resemble Haki, which is a human spirit manifested physically. This again evokes the Sanji quote, connecting flames with passion, as it's Sanji's raw emotion that is igniting his leg, not friction. Whitebeard reinforces this connection in the quote, "You can sever their bloodline but their flames will never be extinguished," equating flames to a person's will and legacy. This particular line refers to Ace and Roger's bloodline, which the world government has tried to suppress. I've gone into great detail on the channel before about how Emu suppresses humanity and liberation, which is why Emu tried to purge any children Roger had. When we look at quotes that include references to flame, we see an interesting pattern that fits this theme of repression. Robin is the flame of revolution since the O'Hara incident, which left O'Hara wiped out. Calgara said to light the flame of Shandora, and Shandora was wiped out. Sabo is dubbed the Flame Emperor, and he was framed for Cobra's murder. Sabo was also said to be spreading the flames of rebellion in chapter 1054. After Doflamingo is defeated by Luffy, revolution starts to spread, described in the quote, "The chaos spread like wildfire." Luffy gets Usopp to set the world government flag in Eni's lobby on fire in an act of defiance. Dragon and the Revolutionary Army also burned the world government flag at Marishwa, so flames seem to be connected to those fighting oppression. The reader was told Egghead Island is an ancient island. The fuel source for the island is fire, so perhaps this means Egghead Island was once a kingdom that went against Emu. After all, we find one of Joy Boy's Nakama here in the form of a massive robot that doesn't have a power source. Since then, it's been alluded to that it was Luffy's heartbeat in Gear 5 that reactivated Emeth. Vegapunk told the reader he was close to discovering the fuel source of the ancient kingdom, and that it's all around us and abundant. Emeth is from the Void Century, suggesting the ancient fuel source is the same as what powered the giant mechs. Although it wasn't explicitly stated, the drums of liberation are what seemed to wake Emeth, as we said before. This would mean the core of the ancient kingdom's power were heartbeats, fitting with the prediction in our last video that the One Piece is some form of heart. So it does make sense when we said earlier that Luffy's heartbeat transforming in Wano might have been what triggered the Mother Flame to turn on. During Luffy's transformation, we saw fire imagery. Sanji, through his character, draws connections between passion and the heart when his heart comes out of his chest, like we see with Boa's victims as well. So what we're saying here is that the drums of liberation, which ignited the Mother Flame, is a product of the heart, which is an aspect of humanity. In other words, in One Piece, Oda connects humanity to fire. The more potent the humanity, the hotter the flame. The hotter the flame, the more the world government tries to stop humanity. Another example that ties the two elements is with the most important form of transformation, which is death. A common image of Emu people use is the shot of Emu with a butterfly on her finger. Butterflies symbolize this same transformation because they go from caterpillar to cocoon and into a butterfly. This is known as metamorphosis. The Fire Festival in Wano is an annual celebration of the dead. We see small flames used to raise the names of the dead into the sky in lanterns. We mentioned already that during Luffy's death and rebirth, fire imagery was shown, illustrating my point. So here we see connections between fire and death. This is echoed by the panels focusing on the flames during the Skypiea sacrifice. Again, the reason for this is to represent transformation. A good example of this is the intense fire on Elbaf that Mother Carmel transforms into a sun homie called Pandora in chapter 866. This chapter contains the number 66, something we discussed in the last video. However, the point we're focusing on is that fire in One Piece is symbolic for transformation. King underwent a transformation that granted him fire abilities. Another example is in Skypiea, when the Straw Hats and their new Nakama celebrate the end of the Civil War by dancing around the fire, symbolizing their transformation into a new era. This scene demonstrates a few Nika-type poses, so we see a connection between a bonfire and Nika the sun god, just like in Wano. This is particularly relevant to our theory here because it connects fire with transformation. Considering Emu's strange abyss abilities and presumed immortality, we can infer that a normal death is not enough to defeat Emu. Emu needs to be transformed. Fire seems to be the way to facilitate this transformation, and fire is an aspect of humanity in One Piece. Another Sanji quote that reinforces this is, "Watch what you say, I tend to heat up when I'm angry." Usopp tells us that an afro brings out a human's wildest instincts, and flames are shown in the background, so it seems pretty explicit that fire, as a product of human emotion, is going to be what rids the world of Emu for good. When it was time for the Going Merry to move on, Oda depicted it burning, which perfectly encapsulates the idea here. The Gorosei refer to getting rid of an enemy as extinguishing a light, foreshadowing this. We know that Emu has beef with Davy Jones. During the Davy back fight, Luffy has a fiery skull on his chest, and an afro which we mentioned earlier symbolizes raw human instinct. Davy was implied to have been sent to the locker through the 3 rules we are told about in the Davy backfight. Davy Jones is at the bottom of the ocean, which is mostly connected to the underworld, or we could go as far as to say death. Fire features in many scenes that seem relevant here, and is pretty much always depicted as green flames. Zoro has strong connections to the underworld, and he can be seen with green flames from time to time. Nushiro also reflects this same point. Brook's devil fruit is associated with death, and his spirit is shown to be green. Mihawk has vampirism connections and is shown with green flames in his first panel. So again, we are seeing death, an important transformative stage, shown with fire imagery. During Thriller Bark, Zoro fought an undead Ryuma. Emu is also believed to be undead. The attack that finally put Ryuma to rest was a fiery dragon attack, foreshadowing that fire and dragon symbology do play a role in killing the undead Emu. An eternal flame is a flame that can never go out, a fire that lasts forever. This implies it cannot be extinguished, so the one who will defeat Emu is the one whose fire has lived forever. Oda tells us that in One Piece, someone doesn't die until they're forgotten. Despite the world government's efforts to remove echoes of Joy Boy from the record, he is remembered by the Fishman poneglyph, elaborated on by Neptune to Robin. Since then, his heartbeat has been reignited within Luffy, confirmed to us when Zunisha recognizes the heartbeat. In other words, Joy Boy isn't truly dead. He's still remembered and evoked, mainly through the One Piece mechanism of inherited will. Presuming that Joy Boy physically died, but he still lives on through memory, this evokes a sense of eternity. So, fire is connected to humanity. Luffy's humanity matches Joy Boy's. This means Luffy has Joy Boy's fire inside him. Seeing as Joy Boy is still remembered through Luffy's heartbeat amongst other things, this means Joy Boy's fire is eternal. In other words, Luffy contains the eternal flame. Will this be the fire that undoes Emu's stone heart hidden at Laugh Tale? Will it also be Luffy that unpetrifies the Red Line and brings down Marijua? The Egghead arc reveals some pretty huge clues to the answers. Off the bat, Vegapunk mentions death, but the Japanese of this uses the kanji for a heart attack as death. So straight away we are seeing Oda include heart symbology. Vegapunk tells us the mother flame isn't the peak of perfection, implying the eternal flame is. Instead, he tells us the mother flame is the ultimate technology that Vegapunk managed to create. Vegapunk says he doesn't know the spark that led to the Void Century, but Oda uses the same Japanese here for spark as he does when he says a fragment was stolen. So, it's subtly implied that the events that led up to the Void Century were indeed caused by someone stealing part of the eternal flame, reflected centuries later by York taking a fragment of the mother flame. The fact a small part of the mother flame, let alone the eternal flame, was powerful enough to destroy an entire island and leave a strange hole in the ocean is testament to the eternal flame's tremendous strength. This demonstrates how flames have the potential for destruction as much as salvation. Two sides of the same coin. Additionally, Vegapunk suggests that some people such as Joy Boy knew about these recurring floods, and questions why the Roger Pirates never told anyone. The reason why he and his crew didn't tell the world is strange for sure, but sacrificing his own life to stoke the flames of a new era does seem to fit well with our theory. In Egghead, Vegapunk revealed that the ancient kingdom was powered by a clean and abundant energy source, which has to tie to the eternal flame in some way. Next, Vegapunk talks about a perfect world, contrasting Emu's perfect world of Moo, which we broke down in a recent video. Lilith told us an eternal flame could be used to make an artificial sun. It's probably not a coincidence that Lilith was the one who said this and was the only one to survive, suggesting she may in fact create an artificial sun at some point. So the heartbeat that makes Luffy resonate with sun god Nika is the same heartbeat that can ignite the fuel source for an artificial sun. There's a creator named FreeAZ that has a very detailed video about how this will realign the One Piece universe back around the sun, but for us, we're looking at how Luffy's heartbeat creates a fire that undoes the world. Considering the imagery we've seen of the Mera fruit creating something that looks like a sun, my best guess is that the Mera and Gomu can combine their effects to create an eternal flame in the form of an artificial sun. Ace made a massive sun-like fireball, and while holding it he said he'd make Whitebeard the Pirate King, connecting the Pirate King to a huge artificial sun. Kaido has an attack called Flaming Drum Dragon, whereby he makes himself look like a huge fiery ball, or in other words, a sun. During the Void Century period, there was a great rise in sea levels told to us by Vegapunk. In the current storyline, sea levels are also rising, which is because Emu used the Mother Flame, leaving a large and mysterious hole in the ground, like at Eni's lobby. The parallel tells us the cause of the huge 200-meter sea rise likely involved the Eternal Flame. So if Luffy is the Eternal Flame and defeats Emu, does that mean the world will flood? The answer is yes, and we can see why pretty easily, which takes us into the next part of the theory. So far in the first video and this one, we have established that it could be the Eternal Flame, embodied by Luffy, that will soften Imu's stone heart, allowing it to be destroyed. However, this is not the only stone that needs to be broken. Similar to the row poneglyphs, the red line is a huge stone feature encircling the world in red stone, hence its name, the red line. If the red line can be attacked with fire in a special way, I think it could burn the Eve tree inside and we'd see parts of the wall just fall straight out as if it's bound to the magic of the tree. If this does happen, the amount of stone that falls into the ocean would most definitely cause massive displacements of ocean, leading to huge changes in sea level. This would most likely jeopardize the majority of the world's population. It appears that the world government have already avoided one flood by moving as high up as they could and settling on the red line. Although we still don't know the height that Mural sits at, it's unlikely sea levels will rise as high as the red line, suggesting the red line will in fact be brought down. So what are the implications of the red line being destroyed? Firstly, Madame Charlie predicted Luffy would destroy Fishman Island, which sits directly below Mural. Otohime told us that when the time comes the world will undergo great change, and specifically tells us this means change for Fishman Island. As such, it's likely the inhabitants of Fishman Island would be in great danger if the red line came down. Joy Boy still has an unfulfilled promise to return to Fishman Island. Luffy promised Shirahoshi, the current Poseidon, that he'd take her on a trip to the surface. Brook replies that promises are to be kept to the death, evoking the idea that Joy Boy failed his promise because he died. But the point is, it strongly suggested Joy Boy promised to bring the people of Fishman Island above sea level. This means we can expect Luffy to save the people of Fishman Island by bringing them above the flood if he does destroy the red line. In a sense, this is like flipping the world, because you're shifting Mary-Joa from the top of the world down to the bottom of the ocean. Fishman Island, which is currently at the bottom of the ocean, would move above sea level in Mary-Joa's place. This is pretty poetic, and having the Fishman, who some connect to Davy Jones, at the top of the world is definitely something I could see Oda jiving with. Now this is where it gets particularly interesting. Something that I still am unsure about but find super interesting is how the rest of the world was affected by the massive flood Vegapunk referenced. How is it there are islands with ancient history such as Little Garden if there was such a huge rise in sea level? How is it that the Nefertari family refused to join the 20 Kingdoms Alliance on the Red Line but still survived a huge flood? Although I don't know the answers, there is an uncanny pattern amongst Joy Boy's allies. The map of Alabasta shows the capital, Alubana, as raised from ground level, which we see ourselves during Usopp's fight with Miss Merry Christmas. The Wano arc gave us a diagram showing us how the country flooded and explained that the country's inhabitants built higher and higher up. Just like Alabasta, the flower capital is raised. On Drum Island, we see a castle built at the top of the Rockies. Shandora is a country that was shot into the sky, twice the height of the Drum Rockies. Zunisha stands at the same height, making Zou another nation raised above sea level. This extends to some islands that have no relation to Joy Boy at all, such as Namakura Island, where Brook was sent during the time skip. The buildings here are raised on stilts, again implying flooding has taken place at some point. So there's certainly a pattern amongst the nations Joy Boy considered allies, which is that all the countries are partly or fully above sea level. That said, we can be confident there were still massive losses. The Sea Kings talk about the two sovereigns and imply that the previous occurrence ended tragically in the quote, and surely all will go well this time. Whiskey Peak also alludes to this with its mass gravesite. Like I said earlier, I'm not entirely sure as to the specifics, but what I personally take from this is that there's been a few different flooding events, and while many died, some managed to adapt. This is embodied early on in the story in Long Ring Long Land, when Tonjit tells us the island's inhabitants move from landmass to landmass as the sea levels rise and fall. The name of the island, Long Ring Long Land, strongly evokes the Red Line as well. So people seem to have survived floods in the One Piece world by migrating. So perhaps it is actually possible the people of the Blue Planet will move up into the clouds. Punk Records is testament to this, as it floated into the sky at the end of the Egghead arc. Onigashima is another part of an island that was raised into the sky, this time using dragon flame clouds. Jaya was shot up into the Sky Islands, so there's definitely imagery of islands moving into the sky. There is another option also. 3 other bridges alongside Tequila Wolf have been revealed, so perhaps this is the world government's way of overcoming the floods. If the world government are abolished, then maybe these bridges will be used by the people of the world instead. This would explain why Oda described Tequila Wolf as the size of a country. In our Redline video a couple months back, we talked about the thematic relevance of the Redline being made up out of broken bits of the ancient kingdom. Vegapunk told us in Egghead that islands in the world are indeed pieces of one large fragmented landmass. So I think a very strong possibility is that once the Red Line is destroyed, it might form new islands. We know the Red Line features several different climates along it, so this would give birth to new winter islands, autumn islands, spring islands, and summer islands. It's certainly big enough considering Marco implied the Red Line is made up of tens of thousands of islands. If this is the case, we might even get a little epilogue where we see these islands inheriting the wills of countries, the mechanics of which were shown to the reader through Dalton on Drum Island. I think it's safe to say Oda isn't going to kill off the entire world, or even most of it, so I'd argue this is the most realistic take. Okay, so let's quickly summarize both the last video and where we're at now, and then we can get into some of the more wilder speculations about who could be doing what in the future of the story. The One Piece is Emu's petrified stone heart. It was hidden at Laugh-Tale. It can be unpetrified using the Eternal Flame. Naturally, a heart that's centuries old will simply rot and die once it's unpetrified. This might unbind the Eve Tree from the Red Line, causing it to fragment and start breaking into the ocean. Something similar has happened before, confirmed by Vegapunk when he said we're staying on the pieces of a broken supercontinent. This reverses the way it was created, which was through the amalgamation of islands suggested by the different climates along the Red Line. This will cause the greatest flood in the Blue Planet's history. The people of the world will be forced to adapt by migrating to newly formed islands made from broken up pieces of the Red Line. They will most likely use the 4 great bridges built by the world government to do this, seeing as the world government would have ended with the fall of Mural. So instead of the sun god being the dominant god and bringing everyone up into the clouds, this would give more of a balanced outcome between the sea god, earth god, sun god, forest god, and the god of rain. So with all that said, it's time to make a prediction. I think Luffy and the crew will reach Laugh-Tale before going back to Marijua. Vivi being in danger will lead Luffy to return back down the Red Line, taking with him Imu's stone heart. Once at Marijua, Luffy will be in proximity of Vivi, and when he turns Gear 5, we'll see some change in his standard Gear 5 form. Alongside Sabo, the Gomu and Mera will ignite the Eternal Flame, which will unpetrify Emu and the Red Line, making them vulnerable. The ancient weapons will combine to bring the Red Line down for good and reshape the world, which will be revealed to be their original goal. Emu dies, the Red Line crumbles, Marijua falls, and Fishman Island is completely destroyed. The Sea Kings will bring the Fishmen onto the surface using Noah, where they'll settle in the newly formed All Blue. Okay, so now let's cover some of the additional elements and possibilities Oda might have been alluding to already in the story. Firstly, and probably most importantly, I may have left out a massive, if not the most important part of all of this. The Sea Kings told us there are 2 sovereigns, and the Elbaf mural emphasizes 2 people meeting, which are likely these sovereigns. Some of you may be familiar with the concept of a twin flame. The idea was popular in the 90s and in short surrounds the concept that a soul is split into 2 halves, and these 2 halves should come together, which we call true love. This might sound like a fringe idea, but it does repeat in other forms in other cultures, for example, ancient Egypt. It's possible Oda will do this same thing with Joy Boy and Lily, and subsequently Luffy and Vivi. If you've seen Hancock or know anything about Hawkman from Marvel, then you'll understand how this works. The closer these people are to each other increases their power, so perhaps Vivi and Luffy need to come together to ignite the Eternal Flame. Otohime tells us, the power of love can save thousands, when used correctly. So maybe 2 people are indeed needed to activate the Eternal Flame so that neither East nor West could use the technology one-sidedly. This adds huge weight to why Emu would want a Nefertari captive. Finally, to go a bit nuts with it, this also alludes to the idea that Luffy and Emu are related. If you have anything you want to add to that, throw your thoughts down below. Next, let's discuss Blackbeard. Luffy's heartbeat, aka the Drums of Liberation, has powerful effects, which leads us to ask some other questions. For example, what if Blackbeard has 3 hearts? And what if he uses all 3 to power the Drums of Liberation? Blackbeard is definitely the other side of Luffy's coin, and he wants destruction. So he too will need a fiery power to undo Imu's stone heart and the red line. The difference here is Blackbeard probably would want to see the entire world burn, quite literally. If Blackbeard is the final big bad, then it could be a newly born sun against a black hole, which is the dying stage of a sun. Interestingly, Blackbeard did force Boa to unpetrify his crew, which could be some ultra-subtle foreshadowing from Oda. Moving on, Grey Terminal was set alight by pirates, perhaps in a reversal of what we've been talking about today. There's actually plenty of fires I didn't include, as well as characters with fire attacks, such as Idaho. I could have gone a little deeper into Marco in this script, as he is a phoenix, and phoenixes symbolize resurrection, or death and rebirth. Another example we could have looked at in terms of our theory is that Vivre cards are a fire blood sacrifice. The Vivre card burns when the owner is hurt, so the Vivre card somehow contains some type of fire, which is probably the fire from the owner's heart, and the ritual performed binds them together. This seems pretty similar to Emu performing a ritual to bind her heart to an object. Something I left out of the main script is the role that the ancient weapons play. I covered it like a year ago, but basically the red line is called the Red Serpent by the Giants during the Little Garden arc. This symbolizes the Ouroboros, which I'm sure we can all agree is intentional. The significance here, though, is that this tells us that the red line is pretty much sure to be destroyed the way it was created. This is where we get into the specific roles of each ancient weapon and how their original purpose was probably constructive rather than destructive. Again, you can check the video for the details. Furthermore, one of the important aspects of the theory I left out is dreams. Dreams certainly are used by Oda to push the same message. Blackbeard says dreams never die, reflecting the eternal flame's undying nature. I left it out because while it is an element, it's more connected to rainbows in the story and cover pages as opposed to fire. Fire is more so focused on the actual transition, but dreams are definitely a big part of the motivation of characters. The idea was to focus more on fire and flesh out what some of it means. In that vein, I noticed that our theory fits well with the devil fruit abilities of the admirals. Light, sun, and ice thematically fit perfectly, but I wonder if Emu actually had a purpose for this narratively, or if Oda was just adding some more spice. I guess I'll finish off by pointing out that while we spoke about Emu today, don't forget Davy still is yet to peak in the story, so think about how flames may connect to him as well. We connected the man marked by flames in our Davy mega theory, so I won't go over it again. Finally, I did want to add, I do know these videos are dense and can be confusing, but if you're feeling a bit lost, feel free to go back and start with some of the earlier similar videos, and that should give you all the evidence and framework you need to understand the heavier bits we've been discussing. Also, do bear with me while I'm switching the audio setup, as I recently broke my computer, so we're bodging some of this by phone. The reveal of the world of Moo during the God Valley flashback recontextualizes some important aspects of the story. For example, when Van Auga said to Saturn that Blackbeard wants the world, or the name of the world government itself. So what is the world of Moo? Is it a dream conjured up by Emu when Emu was a child, perhaps? In chapter 1163 of the One Piece manga, our major villain finally revealed what he or she wants. Emu has a vision of a perfect world, called the world of Moo. It seems that Emu is worried that the spirit of Davy Jones poses a threat to the current hold Emu has over the world. But why? We've seen Emu have a similar reaction to Joy Boy's life force when Emeth unleashed a strong Haki blast planted within him by Joy Boy long ago. So what's with the connection between Emu, Davy, and Joy Boy? Now, please subscribe and like the video, and we'll get straight into unpacking another One Piece mystery. First, we can look back in the story at other arcs to get a better understanding of what elements make up the world of Moo. Emu wanting to make a perfect world is foreshadowed by characters such as Wapol, Enel, Sugar, Doflamingo, Arlong, and Road, each of which are villains of their own respective subplot. Enel is a strong parallel for Emu, invading the Sky Islands and reforming the area into his own, using fear. Additionally, an ancient energy source played a role in Enel's B-plot, suggesting Emu is connected to ancient energy and ruling by fear. In Road's case, he made his own perfect world in an enclosure, where he roleplayed as the sun god, and used the enclosure's inhabitants as toys. This implies a facet of the world of Moo is pretending to be the sun god, and using the world's inhabitants as subjects of said sun god. Sugar parallels Emu also, and in her version of A Perfect World, she remained a child despite being 22, and her subjects were children's toys that no one could remember. So the reader can presume Emu's perfect world involves the arrested development of a child, as well as some sort of great forgetting. So of course, Emu looks quite small. It could be that Emu is a child himself. Now we see toys again in Wopple's cover story as well. It shows us Wopple living under a bridge among junk and eventually using this junk to make toys, and then selling the toys to get himself out of poverty. This tells us that Emu came from a rough background and that his current perspectives are established from this upbringing. Furthermore, Luffy, Sabo, and Ace grew up in the junkyard of Grey Terminal, suggesting their circumstances during their young years somewhat mirror Emu's. In other words, Emu and Luffy both grew up treated as trash and both inherited different perspectives from this upbringing. Later in his life, after Wopple fled Drum Island, he created a new kingdom, which was his own version of Drum, called Black Drum Kingdom, echoing the idea of a perfect world. We see this reinforced by Arlong, who inherited the suffering of his captain, Fisher Tiger, and his hate for humans. He then perpetuated this suffering by building Arlong Park and taxing the local people. This is a parallel of Marie Joie and the Heavenly Tribute. Complete control is also an aspect of the world of Moo, reflected by Doflamingo, who did something similar with his birdcage. Meanwhile, Crocodile's plan was literally named Operation Utopia, another word for a perfect world, and he also made a location with the epithet City of Dreams. So, Emu's perfect world is a world of Emu's dreams in some form. And again, to bring up Wopple, Wopple is actually the true heir to the throne of Drum Kingdom, as his father was the previous king, so we can infer that Emu was a successor to the Ancient Kingdom, but instead remade the Ancient Kingdom in his own image, which is likely Marie Joie and the New World, hinted at in the name, New World. If this is true, then that would fit with the notion that the world was flipped, and would make one half of the world of Moo, aka Emu's perfect world. This means that the other half of the world is not the world of Moo, but instead the world of something else. Considering we're talking about the right side of the blue planet, we can see this makes a clear D shape. The D moniker is associated with Joy Boy and Davy Jones, of course, meaning that this half of the world that has paradise in is the world of Joy Boy and Davy. This tracks because this hemisphere is full of different races, exotic technology, mythical lands and abilities and crazy weather. And again, its name, Paradise, alludes to it being a perfect world of sorts, particularly biblically. So to summarize, we're saying that the left hemisphere of the blue planet, so the half containing the new world, could be Emu's world of Moo, whereas the right hemisphere with Paradise is the world of D. Seeing as the world was said to be flipped, we can infer that prior to 900 years ago, it was the other way round. So Emu and the Ancient Kingdom were on the right side of the planet originally, and Davy was on the left side of the planet originally. Similar ideas have been covered before in other media. For example, in Game of Thrones, there's a large wall that divides the two types of worlds, the North and the South, much like the Red Line does. This tells us the Red Line may have been erected to split the two worlds apart. If this is the case, it must have happened before Emu's rule at Marie Joie, hinting that it may have even been Davy who erected the Red Line to stop Emu from creating the world of Moo across the entire globe as opposed to half of it. The word Moo might evoke the hero of Mamudine, a character Robin told us occurred during the Age of Heavens, centuries before the Void Century. So it's possible Emu was around at this time. We can assume this transfer to the other half of the world occurred during the Void Century because Marie Joie was established at the beginning of the Void Century. The next 100 years is forgotten to the world, potentially in an effort to cover up Emu's connection to the Ancient Kingdom and Emu's origins. Not remembering the true history is partly what we mean when we say the world of Moo is a fantasy or a dream. The world of Moo, first and foremost, is a physical manifestation of Emu's dream. This is foreshadowed by the kingdoms under the world government meeting every year at a reverie, which is a term synonymous with daydreaming. Blackbeard doesn't dream, so he wants to destroy Emu's dream world. Luffy, on the other hand, wants to liberate people from this dream world by imposing his own dream. If Luffy destroys Marijua, this would return the capital of the ancient kingdom back to the other side of the world, which is Reverse Mountain, where we've speculated Laugh-Tale is located. This might suggest that Laugh-Tale was once located in the New World, similar to how Marijua was probably originally in Paradise. So again embodying this whole idea that the world was flipped. Since the Egghead arc, readers were introduced to the Abyss. The Abyss encapsulated a hellish vibe, and there's a couple quotes that refer to Marijua as Hell. Naturally, Hell sits beneath the living world, but Marijua is at the top of the world, embodied by a quote from Sabo when he saw Emu in the throne room. So it seems that the world has also been flipped vertically as well as horizontally. This tells us something else about the world of Moo. That Emu's world is Hell on Earth, or as we might say in the One Piece world, the Abyss on Earth. If this is true, then it means whatever the world government labels as demonic or devilish are likely the opposite and instead come from the heavens or were divine before the world was flipped. So we're talking about devil fruits, curses such as Vanderdecken the First, demons, which Joy Boy is often tied to, and sea devils, which Davy is tied to. So Emu's world is a complete distortion of reality, where the world is twisted or flipped, as depicted by Enel, who's a villain in the heavens right at the top of the world, a false god. With Emu and the Abyss being at the top, we can wonder if this means Davy Jones' locker, usually found at the bottom of the ocean, is supposed to actually be located at the top of the world. As a side note, we see two streams in the One Piece world that send people to these locations, with the knock-up stream sending the Straw Hats into the sky, and the downward plume sending the Straw Hats down into the depths of the ocean. Okay, but when did all this take place? We already said it most likely was prior to the Void Century, and we also mentioned the hero of Mamadine from the Age of Heavens. Fans of the channel would have heard me talk ad nauseum about the connection between Mamudine and Emu, and I've given a rough time frame as to when I think this all happened, as well as how it all lines up with the Age of Heavens. Now, that said, at the same time Oda reveals the world of Moo in chapter 1164, he also drops an SBS confirming exactly when the Age of Heavens took place. This probably isn't a coincidence, and now we can re-examine the timeline and align the specific dates which should tell us when Emu was first around roughly, and perhaps Davy as well. So Oda reveals that the current year that we're in the story, that we call 1541 of the Age of the Sea Circle, is also the year 4141 Age of Heavens. So the Age of Heavens definitely was an age prior to the one we see in the current story. The gap between them is 2,600 years. So during the year 2600 Age of Heavens, something happened that created a new and separate timeline. Interestingly, we have a gap of just under 2,600 years without any recorded history at this exact point in the timeline too. However, I'm not sure if that's just coincidence or if Oda intended it, to be honest. So one idea here is it could have been during this 2,600 year gap that the ancient kingdom was formed, or the Red Line was erected, or potentially both. Either of these events likely embodies a time of great division, so there definitely could have been conflict involving Emu around this time period. Okay, yeah, and this leads us to another element of the perfect world of Moo, which is immortality. The villain of Thriller Bark, Moria, resurrected the dead, among whom were a few Rocks pirates. We also read about Hogback and the undead Victoria. So Thriller Bark connects immortality to a relationship with a woman, evoking Emu's relationship with Lily and telling us the Nefertari Queen was required for Emu to live unnaturally long. Cobra told us there's been 12 rulers of Alabasta in 800 years, and the effects of Amber-Led syndrome could suggest Emu's immortality fades with each passing generation. So in other words, every time a ruler passes, Emu gets a little bit weaker. This would explain why Emu wants Vivi now, which is to perpetuate the world of Moo for another 8 centuries. Immortality in One Piece ties to the perpetual youth surgery, and Emu parallels Sugar also, who's perpetually young. Kureha has a secret of youth, and there's a focus on the imaginations of children in the story, such as with Bonnie. So despite the fact Emu is immortal, it's likely she's perpetually young, and could still be a child as we mentioned earlier, which would explain the small demeanour Emu has. We see this scaled with a wanted poster during chapter 906. If this is the case, then it would mean Emu's dream of a perfect world is a childish dream. What we mean by this is that Emu's dream of the world of Moo is idealistic and comes from Emu's childhood. As such, it's likely unrealistic, which we see manifested by the world's nations suffering under the world government's rule. So in summary, because Emu was unhappy as a child, Emu now projects that unhappiness onto the rest of the world. But if Luffy becomes king of the pirates, he'll likely project his joy across the world, freeing people from this. So why is Emu flipping the world and making things all twisted? First, we take a look at the lost continent of Moo from the myths of our own world. The legend of Moo first appeared in the early 20th century through the writings of James Churchward, who described it as an immense, advanced civilization that once thrived in the Pacific Ocean before being swallowed by cataclysmic floods. The survivors of Moo, he claimed, spread their knowledge across the world, becoming the ancestors of later great civilizations. Central to the myth was the idea of a motherland of humanity, a place of enlightenment and unity that fell due to hubris and the misuse of sacred power. So, as always, we're seeing the whole Promethean flame motif. Moo thus came to symbolize both the height of human potential and the tragedy of its own erasure. Oda's story appears to reimagine the whole myth within its own narrative of a lost age, which would be the Void Century and the surviving shadow it leaves, which is the world government. The name Emu itself mirrors Moo phonetically and conceptually. In Japanese, the syllable for Emu is the reversed form of Moo, hinting at some inversion and concealment. Emu sits upon the empty throne, the supposed symbol of equality among nations, yet secretly rules over all. In this reversal, Oda transforms Moo's radiant civilization into its opposite, a hidden monarch who suppresses the memory of the true sun god. Thematically, both Moo and Emu are bound to cycles of creation, destruction, and amnesia. Moo's downfall, through the misuse of divine power, mirrors Emu's ability to erase entire kingdoms, such as Lalesia, reflecting the age-old act of submerging a world beneath the sea. The survivors of Moo, in Churchward's story, scatter fragments of their knowledge across time. Likewise, the survivors of the Great Kingdom in One Piece inscribe the poneglyphs to preserve forbidden truths. The Will of D may therefore represent the spiritual continuation of Moo, a lineage of those who remember what the world was meant to be before it was written. On a symbolic level, the lost land of Moo was often described as a land of the sun, ruled by solar kings. Oda's mythology also revolves around the sun, embodied in Nika, the sun god, whose freedom stands in direct opposition to Emu's modus operandi. If Moo was the civilization of the sun, then Emu may be the ruler who extinguished the sun, the one who turned enlightenment into suppression. In this sense, Emu is the inversion of Moo, the guardian, not of knowledge but of forgetting. Through this mirror, Oda could be suggesting that history repeats itself through inversions, that every lost civilization leaves behind both its light and a shadow. Emu's reign over a world built on amnesia completes the mythic cycle that began with Moo's fall, or in this case the ancient kingdom's fall. What was once drowned has been resurrected in distorted form, and the dawn sought by the Will of D may be the return to a balance that was previously lost to the ocean. So the premise of the world of Moo has been portrayed in countless media before. Emu wants to remove the human element from the grand equation, because Emu thinks that humans will inevitably destroy themselves over and over again. This will be because of Emu's own experience at the hands of humanity. So Emu represents control, the holding on to tradition, whereas Luffy does not care and his nature alone unsettles the establishment. In the One Piece world, this is a good thing because the world government's control causes great suffering. We see this manifested in the Wapol cover page we mentioned, with Wapol being surrounded by trash. Wapol, aka the people living in the world government's conditions, lives in trash, aka the environment created by the world government, and subsequently he makes a livelihood out of this trash. This raises his standing in the world, which unbalances the world equilibrium, and then Emu is forced to set out and flatten that nail that's now sticking up, if you get what I mean. So what we're saying is that Emu's rule creates harsh and polluted conditions, and then people make do and improvise and adapt to their environment, and eventually some of these people rise out of their situation. But then that leaves Emu to then put them back down. So we saw this with Ohara, right, and Clover. Clover nearly said the name of the ancient kingdom, and because of it, the whole of Ohara was gotten rid of. Now, in the world of One Piece, every great power seems to be connected to a dream. Roger's was to discover the truth, Luffy's was to live freely, and Emu's perhaps is to perfect the world itself. If we strip away the layers of mystery surrounding Emu, pieces suggest our antagonist is not a simple tyrant clinging to power, but an ideologue, someone who has seen the chaos of the ancient world and concluded that humanity must be controlled in order to survive. This is embodied by Emu's Pangaea castle and Marijois. Marijois itself is not a natural feature of the Red Line, but instead built on top of it. The celestial dragons wear helmets and have runny noses without them, indicating humans are weakened by living in the controlled conditions Emu keeps Marijois in. The idea of Marijois as a controlled environment like a greenhouse aligns with the Gorosei, referring to humans as insects. Rode, pretending to be the sun god of his own enclosure, suggests that Emu is also LARPing as a sun god above the sun tree Eve in some form or another. If we go back to Enel, we can find that another facet of Emu's world is some type of special energy source. In Enel's cover story, he uses the power of his devil fruit to energize machinery and get to the moon, and later it's revealed that this same energy has some ancient significance. So, this tells us that Emu probably has a connection to some ancient form of energy source that is used to power up a special technology, which is exactly what we saw with the Mother Flame and the weapon that destroyed the Leisure Kingdom. The significance here is that, in the perfect world of Moo, humans aren't trusted to have access to this technology. Instead, only Emu's forces can use the special power, so again, we're seeing Emu limit the capabilities of humanity. Furthermore, Emu's need for some form of ancient energy source may explain why Marijois was established above the Sun Tree Eve. One way Oda could go about this is Emu tricked the 20 allied kingdoms to move onto the Red Line to avoid the cleansing floods, when in reality it was just a ploy for Emu to set up above the Eve Tree. This trick may be something else Emu erased from history. As we touched on earlier, forgetting is another aspect of the world of Moo, so it's possible. The world government has put a lot of effort into preventing people from remembering certain things, like we said a second ago with Clover and O'Hara. Now, I want to get into some quotes and specific scenes so we can illustrate these points with some evidence for what we've been talking about. For example, Sabo gives us the idea of the celestial dragon in Emu's perspective when he says, "It's not some kind of fate that decides our lives, it's us." This echoes Emu creating a perfect world to prevent fate from interfering. This hints at the celestial idea that they can control fate, but it also implies that people are the ones who can overthrow the current system. Beijing adds to the idea that anyone that has conviction can change the world when he says to Katakuri, "Everyone has an equal right to change the future." Additionally, Crocodile says, "What good are your happy ideals if you can't do anything to make them a reality?" Hinting that the world of Moo is a place of Emu's ideals. Luffy says, "If you don't take risks, you can't create a future." So this tells us that Emu created the world of Moo to eliminate the risk of something happening. So these two quotes tell us that Emu believes strength is being able to impose your will onto reality or into reality, and also that Emu's playing it safe, and because of this the future will never change. In episode 1026, Odin said, "When you're trying to protect something, it takes a lot of determination to live without compromising your belief. No matter how much time goes by, stick to what you believe in and don't let it go." So from this we can see that Emu has compromised her or his beliefs and has let go, which has led to the world of Moo. So Emu is sustaining herself in her own world of happiness, like their own dream, similar to a state of nirvana or a daydream, while the rest of the world suffers. Because of this, the world of Moo doesn't have a future, it's just sustained in its era. Shanks reinforces something similar in the quote, "By experiencing both victory and defeat, running away and shedding tears, a man will become a man. It's okay to cry, but you have to move on." So according to Shanks, Emu doesn't move on or doesn't develop or grow, which means that they are stuck in their situation. So in other words, anyone with conviction or the will to stick to their natural development can change the era, aka overthrow the world of Moo. Vegapunk confirms this in his speech. "The future is in your hands. You have the power to change it. Do not falter, do not lose hope. The dawn of a new era is upon us, and you are its herald." Also, Zeph says, "Even if armed with hundreds of weapons, there are times where you just can't beat a man with a spear of conviction in his gut." However, this isn't all that's required. You also need bonds embodied by allies. Robin says, "No matter how much you want to do things alone, no one can accomplish anything by themselves," which highlights Emu's vulnerability as an isolated monarch. Frankie also says during his Enies Lobby speech in 423, "Not one of them hesitates to take on the world for the sake of their comrades." Now, finally, there are plenty of quotes in the story that make it clear that the change in era usually involves the death of a hero in some way, as is traditional with many stories. Smoker tells us in 483, a man's worth isn't determined by how he lives, but rather how he dies. Whether or not this refers to a physical or metaphysical death, it's clear that something's going to happen to Luffy once he does overthrow Emu's dream and replace it with his own. Finally, the whole reveal of the world of Moo might recontextualize some older quotes. Whitebeard said that someone will challenge the world before he died. Roger supposedly knew the truth of the world. Blackbeard and his crew do often talk about the world, and Van Auga specifically told Saturn that Blackbeard wants the world. Doflamingo in Impel Down hinted that when the treasure in Marijois is revealed, the world will be turned upside down. So from that, we know that Emu is the world, and it's the world of Moo. So with the Dofi quote, for example, that means that if the world knew the truth about Emu, then they'd realise that the world is upside down, because hell is at the top where they believe heaven is, and heaven is at the we believe is at the bottom, right? Where Davy Jones' locker and stuff like that is. So the world has been flipped. Also, this could add to the fact that if people knew the truth, they'd know that the new world was originally where paradise is now, and paradise was originally where the new world is, and that's also been swapped. Okay, so Emu's dream is to create her world of Moo, aka a perfect world. Emu's perfect world is multifaceted. Oda illustrates how Emu wants each facet to work through major villains in each arc, as we discussed. For example, in Modern Wano, Kaido had the country's inhabitants slaving away to make weapons, so this tells us humans act as labour and a means of destruction for Emu. A product of weapons production is pollution, which causes these same humans that are working to have the Smile disease. This tells us that Emu doesn't value the humans' welfare, but instead just their labour. We see this depicted when the inhabitants of Flevance get white lead disease, the product of the world government mining amber lead in the area. Additionally, Enel says that fear is God, so the reader can infer that Emu uses fear to enact their will on the world government's subject, so that again is another aspect of the world of Moo, fear. So again, we see the New World is pretty much dominated by mostly humans and the world government, and the New World literally has the word world in its name. So this leaves the other half of the world free, and the name Paradise foreshadows that it was how a perfect world should really be, aka lots of different races, climates, and possibilities. In the near future, I'll talk a little more about how this hemisphere specifically connects to Joy Boy and Davy. So currently the world of Moo is on the left side of the planet and the world of the Decline is on the right side of the planet. One way we can imagine this is as yin and yang. Additionally, the world that Emu has created is likely a twisted version of what came before, the same way Wapol made Black Drum Kingdom from Drum Kingdom. This also mirrors the fact that there were two sides of the royal family in Dressrosa, with Dofi and Riku. And again, Doflamingo created the birdcage to enact complete control, so we know which side Dofi relates to, that would be Emu, right? Now, the defining trait of the world government is control in the name of peace. In Emu's ideal world, everything would go exactly as Emu wanted. But in reality, from the Celestial Dragon's rule to the censorship of history, the entire system functions like a lid over a boiling pot, and eventually it's going to blow open. We've speculated before that Emu's name is the same as the Ancient Kingdom, so it could be that Clover was about to say Moo, and that's why he was killed. So this gives us a clue as to how to overthrow the world of Moo, which is essentially to bring the secret Moo into the light so the world can see the truth, as we mentioned before. If the world learned the truth, they'd understand that the world is flipped, etc, etc. The fact Emu is hidden leads us to wonder what Emu doesn't want people to remember about her. We mentioned earlier that Wapol left Drum to create his own vision of the kingdom there. He was the son of the King of Drum and is hinted to be involved in his death, so it could be that Emu's father was killed under some suspicious circumstances and Emu went on to create a new version of the father's kingdom, or the Ancient Kingdom. We saw something similar with Loki and his father, Herald's death. So why did Emu do this? Well, now we know it was to make a perfect world, the world of Moo. This is what Enel was also seeking in his search for the Endless Verth, a Birkin from the destroyed nation of Burka invading Shandora and claiming it for his own. That said, we don't know where Enel got his dream from, how he knows about the Endless Verth, and how he got his devil fruit. The term Endless Verth is synonymous here for the world of Moo. It's not a real place, it's something told to these characters as a child in stories. So Emu's dream of a perfect world is the culmination of an age-old fear, which is that freedom leads to destruction. Yet One Piece insists that only through freedom, through laughter and dreams and bonds, can the world truly thrive. If Joy Boy Sim was to try wake humanity from its dream state, then it's Emu's crime that is keeping the world in its dream state forever. The word Moo itself is a spiritual reference for essentially the idea of nothingness. So Emu's world of Moo is essentially a world of nothingness, and in contrast, Luffy wants a world of joy, or a world of anything, you could say. So his devil fruit, for example, transforms anything he imagines into reality. As we've talked about before, there's a ton of other media that deals with this, from Naruto with the infinite Tsukuyomi to Game of Thrones with the Long Night. Okay, so now we have a solid understanding of what Oda was going for with the world of Moo. We've unpacked the elements that make it up. All that's left in this regard is finding out what world of D is, in contrast to Emu's perfect world. In the story, Paradise is described as chaotic through its weather conditions and the danger posed to anyone who would dare sail there. The D clan were said to always bring a storm, so we can see why Paradise might tie to the D clan. Glorious tells us that in East Blues there's a motto that says love is a hurricane, and many D-Clan members are from the East Blue, again connecting storms with the D-Clan. So if the world was flipped, then perhaps the D-Clan were originally where the New World is now, and Emu and the Ancient Kingdom were on the opposite side, where Ohara used to be, for example. Chapter 1. 1163 of One Piece finally told us, at least partly, why Emu wants to get rid of the D-Clan, saying that Moo's world cannot be perfect once they're alive. Additionally, the recent Davy reveals have stirred up another classic One Piece mystery that pretty much every reader or watcher knows about. Rockstar Sebek revealing his true name to be Davy. D. Sebek brings up questions about the meaning of the D initial once again. Some speculated the D means Davy, but the reveal of Rock's true name has subdued this idea a little, because this would mean Rock's real name is Davy Xebek. While this might seem unlikely at first, it does fit with some other naming schemes, like Tony Chopper and Hito Nomi. Both Chopper and Devil Fruit are closely tied to trees, as is Davy Jones, which we covered in our recent Davy Deep Dive, or Shwui, all of which ties into the forest god motif. There's a book series many of you are probably familiar with called A Series of Unfortunate Events. In the story, there is a 3-letter acronym for a mysterious organization at the center of the story, which is VFD. Throughout the series, the VFD acronym pops up, but is often revealed to be just an innocuous coincidence. It's not until the end we get a more definitive answer to what the acronym truly means in relation to the story. One Piece might work this same way. We have mysterious epithets like the man marked by flames and the D-Clan repeated throughout the story. There are many candidates for the man marked by flames, so perhaps the idea is that there may be more than one person known as the marked by flames. This would be similar to how Luffy, Joy Boy and Nika are all separate names. Considering how many characters fit the description of man marked by flames, which has led to tons of different theories, this perhaps means the D has many different meanings too. Again, there's plenty of different theories of what the initial means, so maybe all of these are somewhat right. Maybe the D does mean dawn, which is what fans think Luffy will bring about, but also maybe it means devil, as in the enemies of the god, as we hear from quotes in the story. Maybe it also means drum, as in drums of liberation. I've spoken before about how the D is possibly Emu and Joy Boy's family initials, and knowing the full word could reveal to the world who Emu truly is. This would match what we saw recently with Xebek, where he revealed his true name to Herald, changing what little we knew about him as a character. We also looked at the idea that the Ancient Kingdom might share this same name, and by reviving the name in people's memories, it could revive the Ancient Kingdom. That said, surely after 30 years of manga, we can do a pretty comprehensive deep dive to find out specifically what Odas are trying to get at. As always, we rely on quotes and symbols to get an idea, so let's look at the most important example and see what stands out. By this point, everyone and their mums have released an interpretation of the Harley myth revealed in Elbaf, but surprisingly, a lot of these interpretations seem to differ. Despite this, there's definitely one detail on the Harley myth which is crystal clear, and it wasn't particularly hidden either. The Elbaf mural explicitly tells us the meaning of the D symbol referenced in D clan members' names and the will of D. In the second part of the Harley text it says, "Those of the half moon dreamed." This means dreamers, like Luffy, are D-clan members, and that these people are referred to here as those of the half moon. So, the Harley myth tells us the D is tied to the half moon as well as dreams. This means Blackbeard stands out as special as he doesn't sleep, thus doesn't dream, but still carries the D moniker. The third part of the Harley myth says, Yichu, the inconvenient remnants recall the promised day and hear the voice of the half moon. So we are being told that the survivors of Emu's purge are waiting on the voice of the D-clan. Although we don't know why specifically these people are so inconvenient to Emu, we can see in chapter 1163 that Emu says that Moo's perfect world can't be complete while the D moniker survives. Those remnants waiting for the voice could be the voice of all things, implying there may be an important crossover between the voice of all things and the clan. Additionally, the shape of the D initial matches a half moon, adding to the idea that the D initial at least partly means a half moon. There is plenty of evidence for this interpretation littered in the 30 years of mana already. Moon phases were in Oda's mind from the very beginning of One Piece, going as far as adding these phases in the background throughout the entire story. We see this in both the manga itself as well as the cover pages, such as Buggy's First. A spicy example of this can be seen in the cover page that shows an Amazonian woman and a prince with a baby held in front of the moon, implying that around the time of the Void Century, an Amazonian woman, aka Lily, and a prince, aka Joy Boy, had a child of the moon, aka a child with the D initial. So how do we use the half moon to uncover more about the D initial? Well, we can find Oda using the half moon phase during the Drum arc in the East Blue Saga. So, an island beginning with D called Drum, as in a Drums of Liberation, is where the will of D is introduced, and a sacrifice is made by Herald, which lives parallel with D-clan member Xebec in the past. All of this falls under a half moon. This adds to the idea that the D-clan and the will of D are tied to a phase of the moon's progression, but also implies the D initial also connects to the word drum. The Drums of Liberation were introduced in Wano. One Piece theorist Straw Hat Jedi does a great job of collating a load of moon lore in a couple of videos and online posts, and I've linked his channel below. Toki made a prophecy about the moon unaware of the dawn, and Wano is definitely littered in moon symbols, with most clans' suffix being tsuki, meaning moon. The important thing here though is that the warriors of Wano used a half moon to identify as enemies of the tyrannical shogun. So in Wano, Odin tells us the half moon means those rebelling against tyranny. The moon we see associated is a waning moon, or in other words, a late stage moon. This is followed by Elbaf, which is littered in sun symbology, so you can see what Oda's doing here. We can use this to speculate that the upcoming Great War is what D-clan members have been waiting for, as they are aware of the dawn and want to see it come into fruition. Evidence for this is the factions that protect Joy Boy's legacy in the form of poneglyphs. Shortly before Wano we had Zoo, where plenty of moon symbology was present, and we learned the mink protected a poneglyph. The Kozuki protect many poneglyphs, and they are tightly associated with the moon, as we discussed. Roger left graffiti on a poneglyph he found in Skypiea, the inhabitants of whom are thought to have descended from the moon, so alongside meaning a half moon, and likely drum, the moniker also represents rebellion. During the peak of the Wano arc, Hiyori played Moon Princess on her shamisen, marking the breaking of the night into dawn, and an Orochi burns to death. As a quick aside, the mysterious lyrics of this song are still yet to be revealed. Bink Saki is another song with mentions of the sun and moon, focusing more on the moon towards the end. Black Maria's song in chapter 9, 192, refers to friends or lovers parted on a snowy night, reunited under the light of the moon. Kuina and Zoro's renowned battle featured a prominent moon in most pages. The list goes on, and during a reread elements like this seems to stick out way more, at least of me personally, and particularly around the cover pages. Before we summarise, I should quickly mention that many years ago, a user in a friend's Discord tracked every moon in every panel from chapter 1 to 1000. If anyone wants a copy of this, drop me a message in the service linked below, and I'd be happy to provide. Unfortunately, I no longer remember the username, but if you're watching, then do drop me a message. So there's a tangent about the D-clan and the moon, but What's this got to do with the world of Moo? Okay, well, hopefully this next bit clears things up. So the world of Moo is one half of the blue planet, and the D clan is associated with one half of the moon. Both represent the same idea. The Harley myth told us there were people waiting for the half moon, which means it's not currently there already. So when we add this all up, it appears that the world of D is the other half of the world, but at the moment it's still being waited for. In other words, when Luffy's journey is finished, the world will be flipped. Imu's world of Moo, aka the New World, will become the Old World, and Paradise will become the New World. The world of D, or the world of Dawn and Dreams.
Is King Herald the dumbest character Oda has ever written?
Yes! Yes!
And no. I'm willing to bet the conventional wisdom about King Herald after chapter 1168 is that he was pretty fucking dumb, but that analysis is too surface level. Herald wasn't just a king who made bad calls. He deliberately built an entire political identity out of the belief that Elbaf needed to be morally cleansed. He fundamentally reshaped the Giants' ideology from the ground up, initiating Elbaf's pacifist era. This calculated, radical step is exactly what makes his later decisions look so much worse. He was the ideological architect of his own nation's eventual downfall, a consequence we are currently witnessing. Though it doesn't really take a genius to understand that making a deal with the world government is basically, no, literally making a deal with the devil. I think it all comes down to pure desperation, which convinced him that diplomacy, compliance, and even offering himself to be a slave would earn Elbaf protection and legitimacy. It was a devastating cocktail of straight up naive idealism, a total political misread of how the world actually works, and yeah, a massive dose of deep personal emotional projection. Personally, I don't think he necessarily trusted the world government because he believed that they were the definition of good. He trusted them because he needed them to be Elbaf's moral voucher. But let's unpack the pivot point in all of this. Herald's best friend, Rox, and how Herald turned his back on him at a dire time. The God Valley incident. But here's the truly devastating part. The psychological aftermath of Herald's tough call. When Rox went down, Herald didn't just move on. He convinced himself that his inaction was the weapon that helped kill the one person who actually believed that together they could challenge the world to make it a better place. Think about that for a second. That is the nuclear core of his guilt. You gotta understand, the colossal personal guilt he had then metabolized into the national shame over Elbaf's history of violence. So what does he do? Instead of confronting his failure regarding Rox, he externalizes it. He throws all that guilt onto Elbaf. That means his entire pacifist push was less about being a political genius and way more about self-punishment. He genuinely thought that throwing Elbaf into full cooperation would be a 2-for-1 deal, clean the slate for the Giants and wipe away his own personal sin. This is why his decisions looked totally brain-dead and naive. They weren't rooted in logic, they were rooted in pure tragic emotion. And I want to be fair, he wasn't stupid, but his actions were absolutely barbecue chicken, just cooked. I don't think there was a single person who would disagree with that assessment. Oda constructed these tragic decisions for a crystal clear narrative purpose, setting up a huge thematic discussion about moral choice versus political reality. His misguided choices are the patient zero of Elbaf's entire present conflict, which means his apparent dumbassery was the required first step in Emu's objective to turn the Giants into literal warrior demon slaves. Herald is just one part of Oda's larger thematic architecture. The real question isn't about him, it's about the tragic pattern. Across the entire story of One Piece, we keep finding these tragic idealists, rulers whose failure stems from a lack of self-awareness. People like Odin, King Cobra, Gonfall misread the system, assuming their nice and neat moral code applies all over the place, expecting grace from the machine built only to conceal its corruption and darkness. It is a recipe for pure calamity. I think Odin serves as the clearest parallel to Herald amongst these examples. Odin was a straight-up beast in battle, but his political game was just an absolute flop at the box office. He fundamentally misread the room with Orochi and Kaido. He was so caught up in his personal code that he thought these two actual demons would honor a 5-year deal. That idealism was his Achilles heel, and they weaponized it to not only seal Wano's fate, but Odin ended up looking like a Magic Mike clown stripping for pocket change. With Cobra, his miscalculations were more sophisticated, and we can look at a couple of errors. First, he deadass wrote himself a death sentence by putting his faith in the Gorosei, believing he could ask that Lily question and walk away clean. Secondly, he was way too focused on his morals during the Alabasta drought crisis, as he refused to use dance powder on principle because he knew it meant stealing rain from neighboring towns. It was basically GG strategy when Crocodile set up Cobra, planting the dance powder at the palace to make everyone think that the royal family was keeping all the rain. I mean, congrats on having a moral high ground, but from the perspective of the starving rebels, they were like,
Hey, yo, what the fuck?
his refusal, combined with Crocodile's manipulations, compelled the rebels to spark a civil war and destabilize the country. Then you have leaders whose failure was less dramatic, less explosive, but way more foundational. Take Gonfal, for example. His mistake was failing to grasp that maintaining order isn't really much the same as maintaining justice. He allowed deep-seated discrimination and resentment to totally rot the place from the inside, believing peace could be negotiated without uprooting the underlying colonial justice of Skypiea. He completely underestimated the sheer depth of being a racist piece of shit. And then there's Herald, the symbolic outlier. Yeah, I know it's weird to bring him into a discussion with kings, but I think he represents the purest idealism that ends up being the backbone for the now Sakura kingdom. But his fatal error, which led right to Wapple's trap and his death, wasn't a lack of compassion. It was his gullibility and total lack of critical judgment when it came to saving the 20 MDs, which they didn't need to because they were pretty Gucci. Whether it's the large-scale political catastrophe of Herald, Odin's personal failure, or Herald's individual naivete, the root problem is the same: an idealism that lacked a critical edge against corruption. The math is undeniable. These kings believed their morals equaled political protection, but unfortunately, no, you can't just reshape corruption without using leverage, confrontation, or demanding systematic change. Their downfall is the exact catalyst that gives the next generation the motivation and the justification to take a radically different path, and that spine connects the entire story. Bottom line is that these guys totally struck out because of their big, shiny idealism, just got absolutely pulverized by a system literally engineered for structural abuse. But that's the beauty of those failures. They're the spark that lights the fuse for the next generation, the true execution of inherited will. Just like you liking the video and subscribing to the channel if you're enjoying this discussion. That's why we're putting people like Momonosuke, Vivi, Chopper, and Loki on the same level. Momo, Vivi, and Chopper totally held onto the core ideal, but they completely sidestepped the previous generation's messy compromise game plan. They're just straight up refusing to negotiate with stuff that's just fundamentally broken. It'll be the same with Loki as he reconciles with Herald's legacy. And I bet Oda is gonna write Loki handling that like this. He inherited the mandate to break the figurative chains his father tried to rock, which was Herald's ginormous fuck-up of trying to play nice with the world government's rules. I think this completely parallels the Elbaf prophecy that Loki would kill his own father, because that entire fate is just a result of Elbaf's own broken culture and environment. Loki's mission, therefore, would be to embrace his father's idealism while rejecting the accursed prince label the system created, the polar opposite of Herald, who accepted the violent ancient giant reputation and projected his own guilt onto it. That might not be a clear, tangible goal like finding a cure for all illnesses or opening Wano's borders, but that singular choice, in a sense, this is truly the concept of inherited will at its essence. The old generation tried to reform the system, but the new generation is here to call bullshit on that system. True change means dismantling corrupt structures, and that's why Luffy is the ultimate successor. That's why he's the main character in the first place. He synthesizes everything: decisiveness without cruelty, compassion without naivete because his EQ is off the charts, and rebellion without being blackpilled. He is the logical culmination of every single correction made by his generation. And that's why I think the eventual reveal of Loki's Devil Fruit is so crucial in regards to Herald's development during the God Valley incident, which I talk about in this video here. A lot of people already assume that Loki's Devil Fruit relates to Fenrir, and aside from the Norse myth connections to Loki, I think the God Symbolism Oda uses throughout almost the whole series offers a compelling case. So, a strange thing happens when you start paying attention to dogs in One Piece. They show up everywhere, sometimes not as literal dogs, but as this running idea of loyalty, protection. And I think Oda keeps circling around that idea whenever he's dealing with characters who feel pulled between what they are and what they want to be. That's what makes Loki so interesting. Our level of understanding of Elbaf's legendary Devil Fruit is basically jack shit, but the story keeps nudging us towards a dog pattern, I feel. Loki grows up making friends with the wolves of the underworld, feared for a prophecy he got drafted to without consent, and locked away like he's some kind of disaster waiting to happen. Those images stack pretty clearly that it's hard not to wonder if Oda is pointing towards something Fenrir adjacent with Loki's Devil Fruit. But the bigger point isn't the myth reference, it's the role dogs already play in the story. They aren't symbols for good or evil, they're just symbols for instinct and loyalty, protection, and the struggle not to be defined by how the world sees you. You got the Marines, who are basically the world government's golden retrievers, fetching orders without blinking. And Oda doesn't stop there. We got Inarashi, whose subordinates, the Musketeers, are straight up inspired by the Three Musketeers, with their core brand being loyalty. And let's not forget Herald and Garp, who in the God Family flashback played their own unique dog roles. Herald basically rebrands himself as the world government's good boy, convinced that the only way to atone for the ancient giant's sins and make Elbaf thrive in peace is to ditch his autonomy, bend over backwards, and play the role the world government handed him. By the way, did you know that the Japanese word for prostration, not the other word, which is a formal way of kneeling or bowing to express an apology, reference, or to ask a favor, is called dogeza. Dogeza. Dog. It's got the word dog in it. Also, Loki's life actually has dog in it too. Forgot about that. Then there's Garp, who adopts the guard dog image in order to protect the little guy from his dog hat, his dog ship, dog everything. I mean, it's been right there from the start. But as proven by Ace, this decision had a price. He lost the freedom to protect his own family. He couldn't choose both the Marines and Ace. Also, Yamato's double fruit abilities embody the Okuchi no Makami, which is a real-world deity that is a wolf, but also in the context of One Piece is a Wano guardian deity. And the same ideas of loyalty and protection are completed by Chow Chow, or Shushu, whichever you prefer, the dog from Oristown who, one could argue, started the whole dog symbolism since the beginning of the story by watching over his late owner's store. So if Loki's double fruit is all about dogs, in particular Fenrir, wouldn't it be interesting to ask how his character arc could mirror Fenrir's? Or even better, how can we flip the script and give Fenrir, through Loki, a happy ending instead of the usual Greek mythology doomerist path? And it's not like Oda makes this hard to see, because Loki is called the Accursed Prince, treated as a walking omen, isolated from childhood, and feared because of a prophecy about him killing his own father. Just like when Fenrir prophesies to kill Odin. He gets imprisoned in the underworld and talks like he's 5 minutes away from nuking Namek. You can feel the lore bonk you over the head with this guy. So the real question is, how do you take a cosmic L and flip it into a classic One Piece story about growth and freedom? If Loki is basically Fenrir 2.0, then there's room for a story where the monster doesn't end the world, but actually helps save it, or at least refuses to be defined by the fear or prophecy that built him. So you can see how we might be following a Fenrir roadmap, except potentially steering toward a good ending rather than an apocalyptic one. But something else to ask isn't just what Loki represents, it's how his arc might realistically resolve by the end of the Elbaf arc, with him becoming the author of his own fate, instead of letting a prophecy or an inherited role dictate his life. And it tracks with how One Piece treats fate. Prophecies aren't destinies, they're just prisons characters learn to break out of. Like with Ace, he wasn't a monster everyone made him out to be just because he was Roger's son. And the same goes for King Herald, who had a hard time not blaming himself for Rock's death. He thought that betraying or not helping his friend, Rox, was so awful that it made sense to do whatever it took to clear the giant's name, even going out of his way to please the world government, because he felt his betrayal was just as bad as the ancient giant's violent history, especially since he had ancient giant blood. So I can envision Loki ultimately redeeming Herald through his own personal growth, discovering a path that neither Herald or Garp could ever dream of. And this path would protect his own freedom while still prioritizing the well-being of the people he loves. If so, then the Herald piece becomes the real pivot. The idea that Loki still killed his father, but did so because Herald may have asked for Loki to rescue him from the influence of Emu, similar to how Gunka was possessed by Emu. Now that it's confirmed that he does end up becoming a Knight of God, it reframes the entire event. In the same manner that Rox, under Emu's influence, pleaded with Roger and Garp to kill him, it turns what happened from a cold-blooded power grab into an act of mercy. And in that framing, I can imagine Loki may have been driven by his father to push his haki to achieve critical mass, as it's the only means we know so far that could kill, or at the very least bring someone near to death who was granted immortality under Emu's control, as we saw with Rox. And that sort of ambiguity is perhaps the most probable way for Oda to open the door to redeem Loki. So again, if Loki's journey is supposed to reflect Fenrir, this is where the comparison diverges. Fenrir was punished because the gods refused to see anything other than a monster they labeled him. And obviously, Loki's life mirrors that. It even makes more sense when you think about this. When Loki says he's going to end the world, the meaning is going to shift by the end of the arc. At first, it sounds like he wants to just nuke the planet, maybe leading into that destructive interpretation of Nika, and further fueled by him mourning rocks because this world sucks so hard that rocks died in it. So I think it makes sense that by the end of the Elbaf arc, that same line takes on a new meaning. He wants to dismantle the version of the world that predetermined his fate, that created the illusions to manipulate people, to oppress them, and what he'll aim to destroy isn't the world itself, but the hidden structures of oppression that shaped it. And by doing that, he taps into the ideal version of Nika Elbaf never fully understood because everyone's been arguing over what he stands for since forever. He grows into the version of Nika he actually chooses to be, the one who helps free the oppressed from their chains, but as a furry. Perhaps more importantly, Loki's Fenrir influence serves as a compelling narrative vehicle for a tale about a repressed and misunderstood person who aspires to embody Nika's principles for the benefit of others as well as themselves, because of the power of love and shit. There's an even more interesting character who may have truly harnessed the power of love that we could talk about in this video. Blackbeard going after Hancock's Devil Fruit is still one of the most bizarre choices in the entire final saga. The Meru no Mi only works if you're a 10 out of 10 thirst trap, but unfortunately, Blackbeard is only a 9 out of 10. So why target the one Devil Fruit he's completely incompatible with? Because the answer might be personal, way more personal than Oda's shown us. There's a real chance that the Meru no Mi belonged to Blackbeard's mother before Hancock. Before we get into why it actually makes sense that Eris had the Meru no Mi, we gotta lay down some groundwork first. As I've said numerous times on this channel, love is the thematic thread running through the Elbaf arc. It shows how it breaks the illusion of separation and how easily it can be twisted into a weapon. So when you look at it through that lens, it actually makes total fucking sense that Oda dropped Amazon Lily content in the middle of the Herald God Valley flashback. Like, be honest, no one had Kuja Pirate's cameo in God Valley on their 2025 prediction list. And Shaki ends up being the entry point into this whole treasure through love framework within the God Valley incident. And I mean the parasocial brand of love where people don't love you, they love the idea of you. Eris might be written as the inverse of Shaki. She wasn't desired by the world, she was hunted down by the celestial dragons as one of their rabbits for their native hunting competition. But to Rox, she was still a treasure, the kind you would lock in, settle down with, and then storm into God Valley to protect her and the bastard who's going to eventually tank the global stability meter. So if Shaki and Eris are both being framed as treasures that accidentally drag entire worlds into conflict, then it helps to zoom out and look at how Oda actually uses mythology when he builds his characters. And Blackbeard's mother being named Eris is one of those breadcrumbs you just can't ignore, as she shares a name with the Greek goddess of chaos and discord. If you ever watched Billy and Mandy growing up, that should have set an alarm in your head immediately. Eris isn't tied to love in the romantic sense, she's tied to what happens when desire, pride, and personal value get smashed together hard enough to start a war. Her entire mythology is built around one symbol, the golden apple. She tossed that thing into a party she wasn't even invited to because she's basically the inventor of pettiness. And suddenly, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite are beefing over the apple like it's the Real Housewives of Greek mythology. Eventually, all three decided to be pick-me girls and let Paris of Troy choose the fairest among them. She picked Aphrodite after she bribed him with a mortal baddie named Helen of Spartan, who was already very much cuffed at the time. So Paris basically kidnaps Helen, triggering the Trojan War where the Greeks invade Troy to get her back. If that's giving you God Valley incident vibes, congratulations, we're on the same page. Both Eris and Shaki are the golden apple, the trigger, and Helen of Spartan, the treasure, but each with different flavors. They're the golden apple in the sense of their existence exposing how everyone else behaves, with Shaki exposing the greed, possession, and hierarchy, and Eris exposing Rox's capacity for love, which completely changed our perception of the guy. And obviously, they're both the Helen of Spartan here, since they're the kind of women people are willing to kill for. If Oda's drawing this parallel on purpose, then Eris being positioned as a catalyst, just like her mythological namesake, starts feeling less of a coincidence and more like the story leading into its own theme, the theme of love creating conflict when the world decides someone else's value for them. And if all that is on purpose, Shaggy and Eris both framed as treasures that expose the world's desires, that it puts a spotlight on something Oda might have been slipping on the low. Shaggy isn't just a parallel because she fits the vibe. She's from Amazon Lily. She's woven directly into the same thematic fabric that defines Hancock, Gloriosa, and the whole Kuja worldview. Love and beauty as value, as power, as the thing the world keeps trying to weaponize. So when Oda drops Shaggy into the same flashback that introduces Eris, it stops reading like a cameo and starts looking like a deliberate bridge. He is placing Eris inside the Amazon Lily framework without actually making her from Amazon Lily, aligning her with characters whose entire narrative revolves around being desired, controlled, or defined by others. And once you notice that, the Meru no Mi slips into the picture naturally. If we're following the logic Oda already set up, then the cleanest place to start is what happened right after Kuma yeeted Eris and Blackbeard off God Valley. We don't know where they landed, but we gotta assume they survived long enough for Eris to actually raise him for a bit. At least long enough to keep him hidden and off the world government's radar. And this is where things start to line up way too neatly to brush off. You guys should know by now, but Blackbeard's favorite food is cherry pie. The Meru no Mi literally looks like a pair of cherries. And if Eris was trying to build some kind of normal life while keeping her son alive, picking fruit, baking cherry pie, trying to pretend the world wasn't collapsing on top of them, then it's not remotely hard to imagine her grabbing a weird-looking pair of cherries without realizing she was holding a devil fruit. And if Eris did eat it by accident without knowing what it was, that immediately creates a through line that explains everything. How the fruit eventually ended up in the world government's hands, how it found its way to Mary Joie, how it eventually got forced down Hancock's throat decades later. Seeing how Oda's favorite pastime is making his characters suffer in their backstories, and on top of liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and clicking the bell for notifications, trust me, I personally know Oda, he's basically my best friend. The next part writes itself in the ugliest, most world government way possible, because even if she managed to keep Blackbeard hidden for a while, the Davy bloodline is basically a flashing kill on sight target to the world government. And the moment anyone in the government catches wind of survivors of the Davy clan, they would have sent agents to sweep whatever corner of the world they landed in. So when world government agents eventually find them, the math should be pretty simple. Eris hides Blackbeard, she gives herself up. I can imagine her being sent straight to Mary Joie, whether as a slave or a forced wife, doesn't matter. Either way, she dies in captivity and the fruit reincarnates within the vicinity of Mary Joie, which sets the stage for the part we do know was canon. A young Hancock, enslaved to Mary Joie, is force-fed a devil fruit, the Meru no Mi, purely for the sick entertainment of her owners. And here's where it gets even more interesting, because if Eris really did hide Blackbeard to protect him, to keep the world government from getting their hands on him, that puts her in direct parallel with Rouge, who held Ace in her womb for 20 months just to hide him from the Marines and keep Roger's bloodline alive. I've talked before about how Ace and Blackbeard can be considered parallels in this video right here, with the rivalry between their fathers and how they ended up sharing the same adoptive father, Whitebeard, and how their devil fruits are basically foils to each other, with one representing the sun and the other representing darkness. So by that logic, it kind of makes sense for Eris to sacrifice herself to hide Blackbeard. It's funny because now that I'm thinking about it, a lot of One Piece characters were hidden or were attempted to be hidden by their parents or guardians to protect them, like Nami, Law, Ace of course, Frankie in a way, since Tom was trying to hide his connection to the Battle Frankies. Just a shit ton more that I'm probably missing out. And look, as for why Blackbeard wants the fruit, what he plans to do with it, that's honestly where I'm throwing the ball back to you guys because I have no fucking clue. But if, and that's a big if, the Meru no Mi really did belong to Eris, then I could kind of see one angle. Blackbeard might want it as the closest thing he has to his mom, in a wholesome way, in a proof he has a heart way. I do think in the end, Blackbeard's gonna go after S-Snake and probably the rest of the Seraphim, with Katarina Devon on deck to turn into Saturn to take advantage of the authority chip, so he may not even need that fruit by the end of the day. And if nothing else, the whole angle explains at least something about why Blackbeard, of all people, would go after the Meru no Mi, the one fruit that makes the least sense for him to have on paper. Whatever the real answer is, I think this is a possibility worth talking about.
Okay, so that's all we got time for today. Thanks for watching as always, and feel free to leave any feedback or theories in the comments. We have a community tab and a Discord server if you want to get involved more. In the description you can find some of our more popular theories linked, as well as some fellow YouTubers to check out. Much love for making it this far, and keep an eye out for more video essays.